Welcome. Before we dive into tonight's tale, I have a question for you. Where are you tuning in from this evening? Share it in the comments below. If you love drifting off to these soothing yet eerie stories, be sure to subscribe and enable notifications. Now shut your eyes and let the woods envelop you. Have you ever felt the weight of true silence? Not the quiet that comes when you mute the TV or shut your bedroom door, but the kind of silence that presses down on you, ringing in your ears and amplifying the sound of your own heartbeat. This is the silence you encounter on the paths winding into the deepest parts of the Grand Canyon. And on that crisp October morning, when I first heard the name Emma Riley, that heavy silence seemed to grow so intense it could deafen you. My name is Ethan Brooks, and for 6 years I've been a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park, ensuring the park's safety, especially on the South Rim. Over 6 million people visit the park each year. You might think that with so many people coming, something could happen every day. And yes, you're right. Heat stroke, sprained ankles, the occasional fool trying to take a selfie on the edge of a 1,000 FT cliff. It's all part of the job. But the disappearances, they're different. They keep you up at night, replaying every detail over and over like a scratched DVD stuck on repeat as you stare at the ceiling. It started on a Tuesday, October 17th. The morning air was crisp, that perfect autumn temperature where you could wear a long-sleeve shirt without sweating through it by noon. I just finished my coffee at the ranger station when my radio crackled to life. Call, you copy? It was Sarah Martinez, one of our veteran rangers who'd been working the South Rim for almost 2 decades. Her voice had an edge to it that made me straighten up immediately. Copy, Martinez. What's going on? Got a situation developing at Bright Angel Trailhead. Tourist group reporting a missing member. Female, mid-20s, been gone about 45 minutes. Can you head that way? 45 minutes. In ranger time, that's nothing. Could be. She stopped to take photos. Went to the bathroom, got distracted by a squirrel. But Martinez wouldn't be calling me if it was that simple. On my way, I said, already grabbing my pack and heading for the door. The Bright Angel Trail is one of the most popular routes into the canyon. A 9 and 1 to 2 mile descent that drops nearly 5,000 FT to the Colorado River. It's well maintained, well marked, and still manages to claim a few victims every year, mostly from heat and exhaustion. The trailhead sits right at the South Rim village, and by the time I pulled up in my truck, there was already a small crowd gathered near the wooden sign that warned hikers about the dangers ahead. I spotted the group immediately. 7 people ranging from early 20s to maybe 60, all wearing the kind of expensive outdoor gear that screamed, "We bought this specifically for this trip." Their faces told different stories though. Concern, confusion, and in one case barely concealed irritation. A tall guy with a neatly trimmed beard stepped forward as I approached, extending his hand. "Thank God you're here. I'm Derek Thompson, the group leader." His handshake was firm, almost aggressive. "We started down the trail around 7 this morning. Planned to go to the 1.5-mile rest house and back. Harper, that's Harper Quinn. She said she needed a break about 30 minutes into the hike. We were at this little lookout point, and she said she just wanted to sit for a few minutes, catch her breath. We told her we'd keep going slow, that she could catch up. I pulled out my notebook, already not liking where this was going, and she didn't catch up. No. We waited at the rest house for 20 minutes, then doubled back. She wasn't at the lookout point. We called her name, checked the bathroom back at the trailhead. Nothing. It's like she just vanished. A woman in her 50s, her face tight with worry, spoke up. Harper's not an experienced hiker. This was her first time doing something like this. She was struggling a bit with the altitude, I think, and the descent was making her nervous. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Linda. Linda Patterson." Well, I was sitting with Harper on the bus ride here. We talked a lot. She seemed excited, but also kind of anxious. You know, like she wanted to prove she could do this. I glanced down the trail, watching a few other hikers making their way up, their faces red and sweating despite the cool temperature. "Did Harper have her phone with her? Any way to contact her?" Derek nodded. "Yeah, but there's no service once you get down there. We tried calling, nothing. What was she wearing?" "Be specific." "Blue jacket, black hiking pants, gray backpack, one of those North Face ones." He gestured to his own pack. She had water, snacks, the basics. I radioed it into Martinez, giving her the description and timeline. The protocol was clear. With less than an hour missing, we'd start with a quick search of the immediate area, check the obvious places, hope for the simple explanation. But something in my gut was already twisting. That sixth sense you develop after enough years doing this job. The canyon has a way of taking people, not always in the ways you'd expect. All right, I need you all to stay here at the trailhead, I said, looking at each of them in turn. If Harper comes back up, call me immediately. I handed Derek my card with my radio frequency written on it. I'm going to head down to that lookout point, retrace her possible movements. How far down was it? Maybe half a mile. There's a curve in the trail, and then there's this flat rock area off to the side where you can sit and see down into the canyon. I knew the spot. It was a popular place for photos, a natural little amphitheater of stone where the view opened up like a wound into the earth's ancient layers. Stay here, I repeated, then started down the trail. The Bright Angel Trail begins with a series of steep switchbacks carved into the Kaibob limestone that forms the canyon's rim. Each step down is a step back in time, geologically speaking. You're walking through nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history with every mile. The Park Service jokes that it's all downhill on the way in, which makes people think it's easy. They forget that what goes down must come up, and that return trip has killed more people than I like to think about. As I descended, I passed clusters of hikers making their way up, their poles clicking against stone, their breathing labored. I asked each group if they'd seen a young woman in a blue jacket alone, possibly sitting or looking lost. Most shook their heads. One couple remembered seeing someone matching that description about 45 minutes earlier, sitting on a rock and looking at her phone. She seemed fine, the woman said, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. Maybe a little tired, but fine. I thanked them and continued down. The morning sun was climbing higher now, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red. Above me, a raven circled lazily, its shadow flickering across the trail. The temperature was starting to rise, though it was still comfortable. Give it another few hours, and even in October the trail would be baking. The lookout point came into view after about 20 minutes of steady hiking. Derek had been right about the location. It was a wide flat area where the trail curved sharply, and a spur of rock jutted out over the canyon like a diving board. The view was spectacular, the kind that makes your breath catch and your sense of scale completely evaporate. You could see layers upon layers of geological time, all the way down to the dark Vishnu schist at the bottom, nearly 2 billion years old. But I wasn't here for the view. The rock was empty. No Harper, no blue jacket, no sign that anyone had been sitting here recently. I walked the perimeter slowly, looking for anything. A dropped item, a footprint, a disturbance in the dust. The trail surface here was mostly bedrock, smooth limestone worn by millions of footsteps, which made tracking difficult. But off to the side, where the rock gave way to a narrow strip of dirt and scrub brush, I found something. Footprints, small ones, probably women's size 7 or 8, pressed into the soft dirt near the edge of the lookout. They led away from the main trail toward a less traveled spur that angled down and to the east. This wasn't part of the official trail. It was one of those unofficial paths that develop over time, created by people wanting a different angle for their photos or trying to find a quiet spot away from the crowds. I followed the prints carefully, my radio ready in case I needed backup. The spur path was narrow, barely 18 in wide in some places, with a steep drop off to my right that made my palms sweat despite years of experience. The canyon has a way of reminding you how small you are, how one wrong step can erase you from existence, like you were never here at all. The footprints continued for maybe 50 yards, weaving between patches of scrub oak and Mormon tea, then disappeared where the path widened onto another flat rock outcropping. This one was more secluded, hidden from the main trail by a curve in the canyon wall. It would have been the perfect spot for someone wanting solitude, wanting to sit and think without a stream of tourists passing by every few minutes. And that's where I found her backpack. It was sitting upright on the rock, leaning against a small boulder, like someone had carefully placed it there. The grey North Face pack Derek had described pristine, except for a thin layer of red dust on the bottom. I approached it slowly, already calling it in on my radio. Martinez call. I'm at an unofficial lookout about 6 mi down Bright Angel east side. I found the missing hiker's backpack. Copy that. Any sign of the hiker? I looked around, my eyes scanning every shadow, every crevice in the rock. Negative, just the pack. Don't touch anything yet. I'm sending back up your way. I didn't need to be told twice. This had just shifted from a simple search to something potentially more serious. I stayed back from the pack, studying the scene. The rock outcropping was maybe 20 ft across, with a sheer drop on two sides. No railings, no warning signs, just empty air and 1,000 ft fall to the next ledge. If Harper had fallen, her body would be somewhere down there and we'd need a recovery team with ropes and harnesses. But something didn't feel right. The pack was too neat, too carefully placed. If someone had panicked, if they'd gotten dizzy or disoriented and fallen, wouldn't they have dropped the pack? Wouldn't it have tumbled or fallen with them? And if they'd set it down intentionally, planning to come back to it, where had they gone? I crouched down, studying the pack without touching it. The zippers were closed, the straps cinched tight. Through the mesh side pocket, I could see a water bottle, condensation still visible on the inside of the plastic. That water was cold, recently filled, which meant Harper had been here within the last hour, probably less. I stood up and walked to the edge of the outcropping, looking down into the layered abyss. The morning light was hitting the far wall now, illuminating the red Supai sandstone in shades of crimson and pink. Below that, the red wall limestone dropped in a sheer cliff face. And below that, more layers, more depth, more emptiness. "Harper," I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Harper Quinn, can you hear me?" The echo came back, distorted and distant. "Hear me, hear me, hear me." Nothing else. No response, no cry for help, no movement in the shadows below. I pulled out my binoculars and scanned the visible ledges and slopes beneath me. The canyon is full of optical illusions. What looks like a gentle slope might actually be a sheer drop. And what seems like empty air might hide a narrow ledge where someone could land if they fell. I've been part of recoveries where we found people on ledges they swore didn't exist, saved by geography they couldn't see from above. But I didn't see anything. No blue jacket, no body, no sign of Harper Quinn. My radio crackled. "Colt, this is Martinez. I've got Ranger Davis heading your way with the medical pack." "ETA 10 minutes. What's your assessment?" I hesitated, trying to put words to the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. "Pack is here. Hiker is not. No obvious signs of a fall, but the drop-offs here are significant. I'm not seeing any evidence of her on the visible ledges below, but I can't rule it out. We need to expand the search, copy that. I'm initiating a full ground search. We'll get teams on the north and south cab trails too, in case you wandered onto a different route somehow. It wouldn't be the first time. The canyon's trail system can be confusing, especially for inexperienced hikers. Someone thinking they're heading back to the rim might accidentally descend deeper instead. The trails all look similar. Red rock, steep grades, switchbacks that fold back on themselves like origami. But Harper's group said she'd seemed nervous about the descent. Would someone nervous about going down really wander further down? I heard footsteps on the trail behind me and turned to see Ranger Jackson Davis coming around the curve, his red medical pack prominent against his green uniform. Jackson and I had gone through training together, and he was one of the best wilderness first responders in the park. "Hey, Brandon," he said, slightly out of breath. "Martinez said you found the pack." I gestured to it right there. "Haven't touched it yet." Jackson approached carefully, pulling out his camera to document the scene. "Standard protocol. Treat every missing person case like a potential crime scene until you know otherwise." He took photos from multiple angles, then pulled on a pair of nitro gloves and carefully opened the pack. "Water bottle still cold," he confirmed, holding it up. "Granola bars, sunscreen, a light windbreaker, phone." He pulled out an iPhone in a purple case, pressing the power button. Dead. Batteries completely drained. "That's weird," I said. "Her group said she left less than 2 hours ago. Phone should still have some charge." Jackson nodded, bagging the phone as evidence. Maybe she was using it heavily, taking photos, video that eats battery pretty fast. Or maybe she was trying to call for help and drained it. We shared a look. Neither option was good. Jackson continued emptying the pack. Wallet with ID. Harper Quinn, 25 years old. Address in Portland, Oregon. Credit cards, some cash, keys, lip balm, trail map. He unfolded the map, which showed the Bright Angel Trail with the standard warnings printed in red. Going down is optional. Coming up is mandatory. She's got notes written in the margins. Times, I think. Leave 7 a.m. train, rest house by 9 a.m., back by 100 p.m. She was trying to stay on schedule, I said. Probably felt pressure to keep up with her group and maybe pushed herself too hard. Jackson stood up, looking around the outcropping. So where is she? That was the question. I walked the perimeter again, this time looking for any sign of where Harper might have gone after setting down her pack. The rock was mostly bare, swept clean by wind and time. But near the back edge, where the outcropping met the canyon wall, I found something that made my blood run cold. Scratches. Fresh scratches in the rock face, running horizontal at about shoulder height. The kind of marks fingernails might make if someone was scrabbling for purchase, trying to hold on to something. "Jackson," I called, "come look at this." He joined me, his expression darkening as he saw what I'd found. "Those are recent." "Yeah." I pulled out my phone and took photos, making sure the light caught the marks clearly. They were maybe 8 in long, 4 parallel lines gouged into the softer rock. Below them, on a small ledge barely 3 in wide, were a few threads of blue fabric caught on a sharp edge of stone. "She went over," Jackson said quietly. "Jesus, Brandon, she went over." I leaned out carefully, looking down. The cliff face here wasn't completely vertical. It angled out at maybe 70 degrees, with enough texture that a person might not freeall immediately. They might tumble, slide, catch themselves temporarily on outcroppings and ledges. Each impact would slow them down, but also break bones, tear skin, cause trauma that would make it harder to hold on at the next ledge. It was a nightmare scenario, and I'd seen the aftermath enough times to picture it with horrible clarity. "We need ropes," I said. "Full technical rescue team." She could be anywhere on the face below us, and we can't see from up here. Jackson was already on his radio calling it in. While he coordinated with Martinez, I continued searching the area, looking for anything else that might tell us what happened. The wind was picking up now, that mid-morning breeze that funnels through the canyon like breath through a pipe. It made a low, mournful sound as it passed over the rocks, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. And that's when I heard something else. It was faint, almost imperceptible beneath the wind. But it was there, a rhythmic tapping sound like stone hitting stone. I froze, holding up my hand to signal Jackson to be quiet. He stopped talking immediately, both of us standing perfectly still, listening. Tap, 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 tap. "You hear that?" I whispered. Jackson nodded slowly. "Where's it coming from?" That was the problem with the canyon. Sounds echo, bounce, refract in ways that make it nearly impossible to pinpoint a source. What seems like it's coming from below might actually be above or beside or half a mile away. I've heard voices that sounded close enough to touch, but were actually from hikers on the opposite rim, more than a mile distant across empty air. The tapping continued, irregular but persistent. I pulled out my compass, trying to triangulate based on the sound's apparent direction, but it was impossible. The acoustics were too weird, too distorted by the canyon's geometry. "Harper!" I shouted again. "Harper Quinn, if you can hear me, make noise. Any noise." The tapping stopped. We waited, barely breathing, straining to hear any response. The wind gusted, carrying with it the smell of dust and juniper and something else. Something faintly chemical that I couldn't quite identify. The second stretched into a minute, then 2. Nothing. Might have been rock settling, Jackson said finally. Thermal expansion. The temperature changing makes the rock crack and shift sometimes. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But I'd spent too many years in this canyon to dismiss any sound as just thermal expansion. Sometimes the obvious explanation is right. Sometimes it's not. The rescue team arrived 45 minutes later. 3 more rangers with full technical gear, plus a paramedic from the South Rim Clinic. They set up a rigging system using the sturdy pinyon pines that grew near the outcropping, establishing anchor points for the ropes that would allow someone to rappel down the cliff face below. I volunteered to go down first. It's not that I'm braver than the others. I'm probably more scared of heights than half of them, but I was the one who'd found the backpack, seen the scratch marks, heard the tapping. This was my scene, my responsibility. And somewhere down there, Harper Quinn might be lying injured or worse, wondering if anyone was coming to save her. They strapped me into a harness, double-keyed all the carabiners and blaze systems, handed me a radio and a first aid pack. The paramedic, a woman named Williams. The paramedic, a woman named Alice Morrison, gave me a quick refresher on trauma assessment. "If you find her, don't move her unless absolutely necessary," Alice said. "Stabilize her neck. Assess for major bleeding. Keep her warm. We'll have a litter ready to haul her up once you confirm her position." I nodded, my mouth dry despite having just drained half a water bottle. The harness felt tight around my legs, and I tested the rope, bouncing slightly to make sure everything was secure. The edge of the outcropping seemed to rush up at me. That horrible moment before you commit to the descent. Before you trust your life to woven nylon and friction devices on belay, Jackson said behind me, his hands on the rope, ready to control my descent. Play on, I confirmed, then backed up to the edge and leaned out over the void. The first few seconds are always the worst. That moment, when your brain screams at you that this is unnatural, that humans aren't meant to dangle from cliffs like spiders on silk, but then muscle memory takes over. Training overcomes instinct, and you start the careful process of walking backward down a vertical wall. The rock face was rough under my boots, offering good friction. I descended slowly, checking each potential ledge and outcropping as I passed it. The cliff here was Coconino sandstone, cream-cold and pockmarked with small caves and hollows carved by wind and water over millions of years. Any one of them could hide a body. "Cole, how's it looking?" Martinez's voice crackled in my radio. "Clear so far," I said, breathing hard despite trying to stay calm. "I'm at maybe 40 FT down. No sign of her yet." I continued dropping, the rope feeding through my descender with a smooth hiss. Above me, Jackson was a small figure silhouetted against the bright sky. Below me, the canyon continued to open up, layer after layer of stone falling away into depths that made my head spin. At 60 FT down, I found the first sign, a smear of blood on the rock, dark and dried, with a few strands of hair stuck to it. I radioed it up, then continued descending. The blood trail led down into the right, following a natural chute in the cliff face where water would run during the rare rains. At 80 FT, I found her shoe. It was a hiking boot, Salomon brand, women's size 7 and 1/2, still laced tight. It was wedged into a crack in the rock, the sole facing upward like it had been kicked off rather than fallen naturally. I didn't touch it, just noted its position and kept going. My heart was hammering now, and not just from the physical exertion. Finding pieces of someone is worse than finding a body in some ways. It means they came apart during the fall, that the impact was catastrophic, that what you're going to find at the bottom isn't going to be good. But at 90 FT down, I reached a wide ledge, maybe 10 FT deep and 20 F to cross, and found something I wasn't expecting at all. Nothing. No Harper, no body, no blue jacket, no second shoe, no blood trail continuing downward. The ledge was empty except for a scattering of small rocks and a dead juniper branch that looked like it had been there for years. "I'm on a major ledge," I radioed up, "but she's not here." "Any blood?" Any indication she made it that far. I walked the length of the ledge carefully, examining every inch. Negative. The blood trail ends about 10 FT above this ledge, but there's nothing here. Could she have bounced off and continued falling? I looked over the edge of the ledge. Below me, the cliff face changed character completely. Instead of the relatively textured Coconino sandstone, it became sheer red wall limestone, smooth and vertical, dropping another 300 FT to the next slope. If Harper had gone over this ledge, she would have fallen free and we'd see impact marks, blood, evidence. But there was nothing. "I don't think so," I said slowly. "If she went off this ledge, there'd be signs. Martinez, I think we need to expand the search grid. She might not have fallen here at all. She might have gone a different direction entirely." There was a pause. Then Martinez's voice came back tight with frustration. "Copy that. We'll start side slope teams. Come on back up, Brandon. The ascent was harder than the descent." "It always is." I had to use mechanical ascenders to climb the rope, essentially doing a series of awkward leg presses while the harness dug into my thighs and the rope swayed with every movement. By the time I hauled myself back over the edge of the outcropping, my legs were shaking and my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air. Jackson helped me out of the harness while I caught my breath. The other rangers were already organizing the expanded search, dividing the terrain below into grids, assigning sectors to different teams. It was going to be a long day, but as I sat there drinking water and trying to make sense of what I'd found, or rather what I hadn't found, that uneasy feeling from earlier came back stronger than ever. The backpack placed carefully on the rock, the scratch marks on the cliff face, the shoe wedged into the crack, the blood trail that ended at an empty ledge. None of it quite added up to a simple fall. It felt staged, like someone had deliberately created the appearance of an accident. But why? And more importantly, where the hell was Harper Quinn? I was about to voice this thought to Jackson when my radio crackled again. It was one of the rangers stationed back at the trailhead with Harper's group. "Cole Martinez, we've got a development here. One of the group members wants to talk to you. Says there's something about Harper they didn't mention before. Something they thought wasn't relevant." Martinez and I exchanged glances. "What kind of something?" she asked. There was a pause then. "He says Harper's ex-boyfriend is here at the canyon. That's why she came on this trip. She was trying to avoid him, and now he's asking around about her at the visitor center." The uneasy feeling crystallized into something sharper, colder. I looked down at Harper's backpack, still sitting where we'd found it, and then out at the vast emptiness of the canyon spreading below us. Maybe Harper Quinn hadn't fallen after all. Maybe she'd run. The hike back up to the trailhead felt twice as long as the descent. Every step waited with new urgency. An ex-boyfriend here asking questions. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and it wasn't one I liked. I'd seen enough domestic situations go sideways to know that when someone runs and hides, it's usually because they have damn good reason to. Martinez was waiting for me at the trailhead, her expression grim. The morning had turned into early afternoon, and the parking lot was filling up with tourists who had no idea a search and rescue operation was unfolding right under their noses. That's the thing about the canyon. It swallows emergencies whole, hides them in its immensity. You could have a full-scale disaster happening on one trail, while families eat ice cream cones 50 yards away. "His name is Tyler Marsh," Martinez said, pulling me aside to a quiet spot near the ranger station. 27 years old, drives a black Dodge Charger with Oregon plates. Showed up at the visitor center around 10:30 this morning, asking if anyone had seen Harper Quinn. Said he was her boyfriend and they'd gotten separated. "Boyfriend or ex-boyfriend?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. That's the interesting part. According to Derek Thompson, the group leader, Harper specifically told him it was her ex. She said they'd broken up 2 months ago, and he wouldn't accept it. Kept showing up at her apartment, calling her from different numbers, the whole stalker playbook. My jaw tightened. Did she file a restraining order? Thompson doesn't know. But get this, Harper apparently chose this trip specifically because Tyler hated hiking. She thought coming to the Grand Canyon would be the last place he'd follow her. So much for that theory. Martinez nodded. Thompson feels terrible. He says if he'd known Tyler was actually dangerous, he would have told us immediately. He thought it was just a messy breakup. Nothing serious. Nothing serious. Those words have probably preceded more tragedies than I could count. People always think they can judge the danger level of someone else's relationship. Decide whether the threats are real, or just talk until they're not just talk anymore. "Where's Tyler now?" I asked. "Still at the visitor center, last I heard. Park police are keeping an eye on him, but discreetly. He doesn't know Harper's been reported missing yet. We wanted to talk to you first. Get your assessment of the scene before we bring him into this officially." I thought about the scratch marks on the rock, the blood trail, the empty ledge. I think Harper might have staged the fall. Martinez's eyebrows rose. Staged it. The backpack was too neat, too carefully placed, and the blood trail just stops. I found her shoe wedged in a crack, but no body, no indication she actually fell. All the way down. What if she wanted us to think she fell? What if she's hiding somewhere in the canyon trying to wait Tyler out? "That's a hell of a risk," Martinez said. "She'd have to know we'd launch a full search, waste resources, potentially put other rangers in danger. Maybe she was desperate. Maybe she thought if Tyler believed she was dead, he'd finally leave her alone." We stood in silence for a moment, watching a family of tourists pose for photos at the rim overlook, their kids running dangerously close to the edge while their parents shouted warnings. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that somewhere in the layered stone beneath them, a woman might be hiding for her life. Or Martinez said quietly, "Tyler found her first." The words hung between us, heavy as stone. It was the scenario neither of us wanted to voice, but both were thinking. What if Tyler had followed Harper onto the trail? What if he'd caught up to her at that secluded outcropping? What if the scratch marks weren't from someone trying to save themselves from falling, but from someone trying to fight off an attacker? What if we weren't looking for a missing person at all, but for a body? "I need to talk to Tyler," I said. "See his reaction when I mention Harper's missing." People can't always control their micro-expressions, especially if they're guilty of something. Martinez hesitated. "Park police will want to be present." This could become a criminal investigation. Then call them, but I'm going in there. I started walking toward the visitor center before she could argue. The Grand Canyon Visitor Center is a sprawling complex of stone and glass designed to blend with the natural landscape while accommodating millions of visitors each year. Inside, it was packed with people studying maps, watching the orientation film, buying overpriced souvenirs. The air conditioning was a shock after the dry heat outside, and I felt goosebumps rise on my sweat-dampened skin. I spotted Tyler immediately. He was sitting on one of the wooden benches near the information desk, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. Early 20s, athletic build, wearing jeans and a plain black t-shirt that showed off Jim's sculpted arms. His dark hair was styled with too much product, and he kept checking his phone, then looking up at every woman who walked by. Park Police Officer James Rodriguez was standing nearby pretending to study a display about canyon geology, while keeping Tyler in his peripheral vision. I caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. He straightened, hand resting casually near his radio, ready to intervene if things went sideways. I approached Tyler directly, my ranger uniform and badge clearly visible. He looked up as I stopped in front of him, his expression shifting from annoyed, waiting to eager hope. "Are you here about Harper?" he asked immediately, standing up. "Did you find her? Is she okay? Interesting." He assumed I was there about her before I'd even introduced myself. "I'm Ranger Cole. You reported that Harper Quinn was separated from you." His face colored slightly. "Well, not separated exactly. We're both visiting the canyon, but we're not together. I came to surprise her, actually. Thought it would be romantic, you know. But I can't find her anywhere. When did you last see Harper?" "Yesterday. We had dinner in Tucson. That's the town just outside the park. She was staying at a hotel there with some group tour thing. I tried to talk to her, convince her we should explore the canyon together today, but she said she already had plans with her group." He ran his hand through his hair, disturbing the careful styling. "I figured I'd just show up this morning, maybe run into her at the trails, but I've been asking around for hours and nobody's seen her. What time did you arrive at the park this morning?" "Maybe 6:30. I wanted to catch the sunrise, and I thought Harper might too. She loves sunrise." His voice had taken on a wistful quality that might have seemed sweet if I didn't know the context. "We used to watch them together all the time back in Portland." "But you didn't see her at sunrise?" "No. I drove around to the different viewpoints, checked the lodges, asked at a few trailheads, nothing." His leg started bouncing again, that nervous energy radiating off him in waves. "That's when I came here. I thought maybe someone at the visitor center would know which trails the tour groups usually take." I pulled out my notebook, making a show of writing things down. "And what's your relationship with Harper exactly?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We're dating, have been for 3 years. Harper's tour group leader said you two broke up 2 months ago." "We had a fight." "Okay, a bad one." "Harper said some things. I said some things, but we didn't break up. She just needed space to cool down." His voice was rising now, drawing looks from nearby tourists. Officer Rodriguez shifted closer, his hand definitely on his radio now. "Did Harper tell you she needed space, or did you decide that's what she meant?" Tyler's face flushed darker. "Who have you been talking to? Did that tour guide say something? Because he doesn't know anything about our relationship. Harper probably told him whatever she thought would make her look good." "I'm trying to locate Harper," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "That's all. If you have any information that might help us find her, I need you to share it." "Wait, locate her? What do you mean, locate her?" The color drained from his face. "Is Harper missing? Did something happen?" His reaction seemed genuine. Shock, fear, a hint of panic creeping into his eyes. But I'd learned a long time ago that people can fake just about any emotion if they're motivated enough. And Tyler clearly had motivation to appear concerned. "Harper's group reported her missing this morning," I said, watching him carefully. "She separated from them on the Bright Angel Trail around 7:30 and didn't return." "Oh my God." Tyler sat down hard on the bench, his hands gripping his knees. "Oh my God, is she hurt? Did she fall?" "The canyon, Jesus, people die here all the time, don't they? We're conducting a thorough search. Can you account for your whereabouts between 7 and 11 this morning?" His head snapped up. "What you think?" No. I was nowhere near Bright Angel Trail. I was at the Desert View Watchtower on the east side of the park. I've got receipts from the gift shop, timestamps on my photos. Ask anyone who works there. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward then, his presence suddenly authoritative rather than casual. Mr. Marsh, I'm going to need you to come with me to answer a few more questions. Just routine. Help us establish a timeline. Am I under arrest? Tyler's voice had gone high and tight. No, sir. We just need your cooperation with an active search and rescue operation. Tyler looked between us, his expression cycling through confusion, anger, and something else. Calculation, maybe, like he was trying to work out what we knew and what we were guessing. Finally, he nodded. Fine, whatever helps find Harper. As Rodriguez led him away toward the park police office, Martinez appeared at my elbow. What do you think? I think he's either a really good actor, or he genuinely doesn't know what happened to her. I watched Tyler's retreating back, noting the tension in his shoulders. The way he kept looking back toward the visitor center entrance, like he was considering bolting. But I also think he's not telling us everything. Nobody ever does. Martinez checked her watch. It's been almost 7 hours since Harper was last seen. If she's injured somewhere, every hour counts. We need to expand the search beyond the immediate fall zone. I pulled out my trail map, spreading it on a nearby table. The Bright Angel Trail snaked down into the canyon for 9 1/2 miles, but it intersected with other trails. The Plateau Point Trail, the River Trail, even some unmaintained routes that only locals and experienced hikers knew about. If Harper had wanted to hide, really hide, she could have gone anywhere. What about the River Trail? I suggested, tracing it with my finger. It branches off about 1.5 miles down Bright Angel. If she made it that far, she could have headed east or west along the river, found a beach or an overhang to hide under. That's miles of rough terrain, Martinez said. We'd need multiple teams, maybe a helicopter. Get them, if there's even a chance she's alive and hiding. We have to cover every possibility. Martinez nodded and pulled out her radio, already coordinating with dispatch. I folded up the map and headed back outside, needing to think, to process everything I'd learned. The afternoon sun was brutal now, the temperature pushing into the high 7s despite it being October. Any exposed skin would burn within an hour without protection. If Harper was out there, she'd be dealing with sun exposure, dehydration, temperature extremes. The canyon's elevation dropped from about 7,000 FT at the rim to 2,500 FT at the river, which meant temperature swings of 30 or 40 degrees. What felt comfortable at the rim could be deadly heat down below. My radio crackled. Cole, this is Davis. I'm at the outcropping. We found something else. My pulse quickened. What is it? There's another trail here. Not on any of the official maps, but it's definitely been used recently. Looks like it leads down and northeast away from the main Bright Angel route. We found fresh boot prints. Small ones could be female. I felt a surge of hope mixed with dread. I'm on my way back down. The descent to the outcropping was faster. This time, adrenaline overriding fatigue. Jackson was still there with 2 other rangers, and they'd marked the new trail with orange flags, so teams could follow it safely. The boot prints were clear in the dusty soil. Definitely someone moving quickly, almost running in places where the trail widened enough to allow it. How far does this trail go? I asked. Don't know yet, Jackson said, but it's heading toward the Tanto Plateau. If she made it there, she'd have options. Dozens of side canyons and ravines to hide in. The Tanto Plateau is a massive bench of rock that circles much of the inner canyon, creating a relatively flat hiking route through otherwise vertical terrain. It's popular with backpackers doing multi-day loops, but it's also remote, exposed, and unforgiving. People have died of heat exposure on the Tanto, even in spring and fall. Their bodies found days later by hikers who stumbled across them. We're going to need more people, I said. This just turned into a wilderness search, not a fall rescue. But even as I said it, a thought kept nagging at me. The carefully placed backpack, the convenient blood trail, the shoe wedged where we'd be sure to find it. What if Harper had done all this deliberately, creating breadcrumbs to lead us in one direction, while she went another? Or what if Tyler had done it, staging an accident to cover up something worse? I radioed up to Martinez, filling her in on the new trail. She confirmed that Tyler's alibi was checking out. Multiple witnesses placed him at Desert View Watchtower during the critical time window, but alibis could be fabricated, especially if someone had help. Keep him there anyway, I said. I want to know more about his movements yesterday. when he claimed he had dinner with Harper. As we prepared to follow the trail further, my radio crackled again. This time it was one of the rangers searching the South Cobb Trail, almost 3 men away as the crow flies. "Cole Martinez, we've got a possible sighting. Hiker reports seeing a woman in a blue jacket about an hour ago near Skeleton Point. She was alone, moving fast, and when he tried to say hello, she basically ran away from him." My heart jumped. Did he get a good look at her? Not great. He was on his way up and pretty focused on just breathing, but he said she looked young, dark hair in a ponytail. Definitely seemed like she didn't want company. Skeleton Point is a prominent overlook on the South Cobb Trail about 3 mi down from the rim. It's a popular turnaround spot for day hikers because it offers spectacular views without requiring a full descent to the river. More importantly, it's connected to the Tonto Plateau Trail, which means if Harper had somehow made it across the canyon's interior, she could be trying to circle back toward civilization on a different road. "That's got to be her," Jackson said. "Who else would be running away from people unless it's someone who doesn't want to be found," I thought. But I kept that to myself. "Martinez, can we get a team to Skeleton Point?" I asked over the radio, "and have them approach carefully. If it's Harper and she's running, we don't want to spook her into doing something dangerous." "Copy that. I'm sending Rangers Morrison and Lee. They're our best trackers." The sun was starting its descent toward the western rim now, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. Beautiful and deadly, the canyon's eternal paradox. We had maybe 3 hours of good daylight left, and after that, searching would become exponentially more dangerous. People have walked right past injured hikers in the dark, missed them by feet because the shadows play tricks, and headlamps only illuminate small circles. I made a decision. "Jackson, you and the team keep following this trail from the outcropping. I'm going to head over to South Cobb. Try to intercept at Skeleton Point." "That's a long way around," he protested. "By the time you get there, I know. But if it is Harper, and she sees a whole search team coming, she might panic. Run somewhere even more dangerous." I was already mentally calculating the route back up to the rim. "Drive around to the South Cape trailhead. Descend 3 mi. 90 minutes if I pushed hard. Just trust me on this." The climb back up to the rim was brutal. My legs were screaming, my lungs burning despite years of conditioning. The altitude at the rim, nearly 7,000 FT, meant less oxygen with every breath, and I'd already been up and down the trail twice today. But I didn't slow down. Somewhere in this vast geological wound, Harper Quinn was either hiding in terror or lying injured. Either way, she needed help. I made it to my truck in 45 minutes, a personal record I'd probably regret tomorrow. The drive to the South Kaibab trailhead took another 20, the road winding through ponderosa pine forest that felt surreal after the exposed rock of the canyon trails. By the time I started down South Kaibab, the sun was noticeably lower, the shadows lengthening across the trail. South Kaibab is steeper than Bright Angel, with no shade and no water sources. It's a trail that demands respect, punishes mistakes. I passed several groups of hikers on their way up, all of them red-faced and exhausted. None of them had seen a woman in a blue jacket recently. At Cedar Ridge, about 1.5 miles down, I stopped to catch my breath and radio for an update. Martinez's voice came back tense. "Cole, we might have a problem." Tyler Marsh slipped away from the officer watching him. "He went to the bathroom about 30 minutes ago and never came back. We found his car still in the parking lot, but he's gone." Ice flooded my veins. "He's in the canyon." "That's our assumption. We don't know which trail, but it's South Cab," I said with sudden certainty. "The sighting at Skeleton Point. He heard us talking about it, or someone mentioned it. He's going after Harper. Cole, wait for backup." If Tyler's dangerous. But I was already moving, running now, despite my exhausted legs, despite the steep grade that made each step a controlled fall forward. The trail switched back down through Cucanino sandstone, past ancient marine fossils frozen in stone, through 2 billion years of geological history, compressed into vertical distance, beautiful and irrelevant. All that mattered was getting to Skeleton Point before Tyler did. I rounded a curve and nearly collided with an older couple struggling upward. They pressed against the rock wall to let me pass, concern on their faces. "Ranger, are you okay?" the woman asked. "Did you see a man coming down fast?" "Dark hair, black t-shirt." They exchanged glances. "Maybe 10 minutes ago," the man said. "He nearly knocked my wife over. Didn't even apologize." 10 minutes. He had a 10-minute head start, but he didn't know the trail like I did. I pushed harder, my hand on my radio, ready to call for immediate backup the moment I saw anything. A skeleton point came into view as I descended through a narrow section between towering walls of Supai sandstone. The point itself is a dramatic finger of rock jutting out over the canyon, offering 360-degree views that would be breathtaking if I wasn't running on pure adrenaline and fear. And there at the edge of the point I saw them both. Harper was backed against the rock wall at the far end of the point, her blue jacket torn and dirty, her face scratched and bleeding. She'd lost one shoe, the mate to the one I'd found earlier. I realized her eyes were wide with terror, fixed on Tyler, who stood between her and the trail leading back to safety. "Harper, please," Tyler was saying, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "Just talk to me. That's all I want. Just talk. Stay away from me." Her voice was raw, desperate. "Tyler, I'm warning you." I stepped out onto the point, my hand raised in what I hoped was a calming gesture. "Tyler Harper, I'm Ranger Cole. Let's everybody take a breath here." They both spun toward me. Tyler's expression cycled through surprise, frustration, and then something darker. Harper's face crumpled with relief. "Thank God," she breathed. "He won't let me leave. He's been following me all day." "That's not Harper. I just want to talk." Tyler took a step toward her. "Don't move," I said sharply, my voice carrying the authority of a federal law enforcement officer. Tyler stepped back now. He turned to me, his face twisted with anguish. "You don't understand. She's been lying to everyone. We never broke up. She just decided one day she didn't want me anymore and started ignoring me, won't return my calls, blocked me on everything, told her friends I was harassing her, when all I've done is try to work things out like adults. Is that why you followed her to the Grand Canyon?" I kept my voice steady, my body positioned between them now. "Because that's what adults do." I didn't follow her. "I came here because I thought if I could get her alone away from her friends who keep poisoning her against me, she'd listen. She'd remember why we were good together." Harper's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "Good together. Tyler, you showed up at my work. You waited outside my apartment building. You sent me flowers from a secret admirer because you thought I wouldn't know they were from you. That's not love. That's stalking. It's persistence." His voice cracked. "You're supposed to fight for love, aren't you? You're not supposed to just give up the second things get hard." I needed to de-escalate this before it spiraled further. "Tyler, I understand you're hurting. Breakups are painful, but right now Harper is clearly scared, and you need to respect that. Step back. Let me talk to her and we can all walk out of here safely." For a long moment I thought he might listen. His shoulders sagged, his face crumpling like he was about to cry, but then he looked past me at Harper, and something hardened in his expression. "You staged your own death," he said flatly. "That's why they found your backpack, your shoe. You wanted everyone to think you fell so I'd leave, so I'd stop trying." His voice rose. "Did you really hate me that much? That you'd rather die than be with me?" Harper was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "I didn't want to die, Tyler. I wanted you to let me go. I wanted you to finally accept that it's over. It's not over until I say it's over." He lunged. I intercepted him. Years of defensive tactics training kicking in automatically. We went down together on the rock, dangerously close to the edge where the point dropped away into empty air. I heard Harper scream, heard footsteps running, but all my focus was on controlling Tyler's arms, preventing him from striking, from pushing, from sending either of us over the edge. "Federal officer," I shouted, trying to establish authority even as we grappled. "Tyler Marsh, you're under arrest." He fought like someone with nothing left to lose. All desperate strength and wild swings. My radio went flying, skittering across the rock. For a horrible moment we rolled toward the edge, and I could see nothing but sky and canyon beyond Tyler's shoulder. One more rotation and we'd both go over. Then Jackson was there tackling Tyler from the side, adding his weight to mine. Between us, we managed to wrestle Tyler onto his stomach, getting his arms behind his back. Jackson had zip-tie restraints on his belt, standard gear for rangers who sometimes have to deal with unruly visitors, and he secured Tyler's wrists while I caught my breath. "Are you okay, Jackson?" and panted. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My hands were shaking with adrenaline dump. Tyler was crying now, his face pressed against the stone, his body convulsing with sobs. "I loved her," he kept saying. "I loved her so much." Harper had collapsed against the rock wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly. I picked up my radio, miraculously undamaged, and called for medical and law enforcement backup. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Are you hurt?" I asked Harper gently, kneeling beside her. She shook her head, then changed it to a nod, then just burst into tears. "I thought he was going to kill me. When I saw him on the trail this morning, I just ran. I didn't have a plan. I just ran. The backpack, I left it so you'd search that area, so you'd find me if she couldn't finish the sentence. You did the right thing," I said, even though leading us on a wild goose chase through the canyon wasn't exactly right. But she'd been terrified, desperate, and she'd survived. That counted for something. Officer Rodriguez appeared with 2 other rangers, huffing from the rapid descent. They took custody of Tyler, reading him his rights while he continued to sob. As they led him away, he kept looking back at Harper, his face a mask of betrayal and incomprehension. "I loved you," he said one last time. Harper didn't respond. She just pressed her face against her knees and cried harder. The medical team reached us 40 minutes later, bringing water, first aid supplies, and warm blankets, despite the lingering heat of the afternoon. Harper was dehydrated, sunburned, and showing early signs of shock, but otherwise physically unharmed. The scratches on her face were superficial, the result of running through brush in her panic, rather than any violence. The blood I'd found on the cliff face had been from a deliberate self-inflicted cut on her palm. She'd pressed her hand against the rock to make it look like she'd fallen. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying as the paramedic checked her vitals. "I wasted everyone's time. All those people searching for me when I was just hiding like a coward." "You weren't a coward," I said firmly. "You were scared. There's a difference." Alice Morrison, the paramedic who'd prepped me for the rope descent that morning, wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Harper's arm. "Your BP's elevated, which is normal given the circumstances. When was the last time you ate or drank anything?" "This morning before the hike. I had a granola bar and some water." "That's almost 12 hours ago," Alice said, glancing at me with concern. "We need to get her up to the rim. Get some food and fluids in her. Run a full medical eval." The evacuation was slow and careful. Harper couldn't walk on her shoeless foot. She'd torn it up pretty badly running over rocks, so we called for a mule team. The canyon mules are sturdy, sure-footed animals that can navigate trails humans sometimes struggle with, and they're used regularly for medical evacuations when helicopter access isn't feasible or safe. By the time we reached the South Cobb trailhead, the sun was setting, painting the canyon in those impossible shades of red and purple that make tourists spend thousands on cameras, trying to capture what their eyes can see for free. The parking lot was packed with people watching the sunset, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded below them. Tyler was already gone, transported to the park police station for formal processing before being handed over to the Coconino County Sheriff. He'd face multiple charges: stalking, assault on a federal officer, resisting arrest. His love story had become a criminal case, his romantic gestures reclassified as evidence of obsessive behavior. Harper's tour group was waiting at the trailhead, their relief palpable when they saw her on the mule. Derek Thompson looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 12 hours, the guilt written clearly on his face. "Harper, I'm so sorry," he started, but she cut him off. "You didn't know. I didn't tell you how bad it really was." She climbed down from the mule with Alice's help, wincing as her injured foot touched the ground. "I thought I could just escape for a few days, pretend my life wasn't falling apart. Stupid, right?" "Not stupid," Linda Patterson said, stepping forward to offer support. "Just human." They loaded Harper into an ambulance for transport to the clinic, and I promised to come by later to take her official statement. As the ambulance pulled away, Martinez appeared at my side, looking as exhausted as I felt. "Hell of a day," she said. "That's one way to put it. Park police want you to write up a full incident report, and the superintendent wants a briefing first thing tomorrow on how we're going to handle the media. This is going to be news. Young woman fakes her death to escape stalker boyfriend. Dramatic rescue at the Grand Canyon. Cable news will eat it up." I groaned. Media attention was the last thing any of us wanted. It would turn Harper into a spectacle, reduce her terror to a feel-good story about rangers saving the day. Can we at least keep her name out of it? We'll try, but once Tyler's arraignment happens, it'll be public record anyway. Martinez sighed, rubbing her temples. Go home, Cole, get some rest. You've been up and down that canyon 3 times today. Your knees must be screaming. They were, but I barely felt it. Adrenaline was still coursing through my system. That post-crisis buzz that makes it impossible to sit still. I need to finish the search documentation first. Make sure all the evidence is catalogued properly. Jackson already handled it. He's good like that. She squeezed my shoulder. Seriously, Brandon, go home. That's an order. I wanted to argue, but the exhaustion was finally catching up to me. My legs felt like they were made of wet concrete, and my hands still had a faint tremor from the fight with Tyler. Fine, but call me if anything develops. Will do. The drive home took 30 minutes through darkening forest and small communities that service the park. I lived in a small cabin about 15 mi from the South Rim, a rustic place with no TV and spotty cell reception. It was perfect for someone who spent all day surrounded by people. When I got home, I wanted silence and solitude. But that night, the silence felt different, heavier. I kept replaying the moment when Tyler lunged. The split second where I'd made the choice to intercept him instead of grabbing Harper and running. If I'd chosen wrong, if I'd been a half second slower, we could have all gone over that edge. 3 bodies at the bottom of the canyon, instead of 1 stalker in custody. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat on my porch, watching the stars emerge in the crystalline sky out here away from city lights. The Milky Way was a river of light overhead, so dense with stars it looked like someone had spilled milk across black, velvet and indifferent. The universe didn't care about Tyler's twisted love or Harper's terror, just kept spinning, kept burning, kept existing, on timescales that made human drama seem like the flicker of a match. My phone buzzed. A text from Jackson Harper's stable gave her statement. She wants to thank you personally. I texted back that it wasn't necessary, that I was just doing my job, but that felt hollow even as I typed it. Today hadn't been just another day of heat exhaustion cases and lost tourists. Today had reminded me why I took this job in the first place. 3 days later, I returned to the outcropping where I'd found Harper's backpack. The scene had been processed and cleared, the orange flags removed. The area returned to its natural state. You'd never know a search and rescue operation had centered here. Never know that a woman had stood at this spot and made the desperate choice to fake her own death. The backpack was still in evidence lockup, but I'd brought my own pack with water and lunch. I sat on the same rock where Harper's pack had rested and looked out at the canyon, trying to understand what she'd felt in those moments. The fear that had driven her to cut her own hand, smear blood on the rocks, leave breadcrumbs of a fall that never happened. I thought about Tyler too, sitting in a county jail cell, probably still convinced he'd done nothing wrong. In his mind, he'd been fighting for love, refusing to give up on someone he cared about. He couldn't see or refuse to see that his persistence had crossed the line from romantic to predatory, that his love had become a prison Harper had to escape at any cost. You looked deep in thought. I turned to find Alice Morrison hiking up the trail, her medical pack on her shoulders. She waved and climbed up to the outcropping, taking a seat beside me. Just thinking about the case, I said. Harper flew back to Portland yesterday. I talked to her before she left. Alice pulled out her water bottle and took a long drink. She wanted me to tell you something. She said you treated her like a person, not like a victim or a story. That mattered to her. I just asked her questions. You'd be surprised how rare that is. Most people, they see a situation like hers and they immediately start judging. Why didn't she get a restraining order? Why didn't she go to the police sooner? Why didn't she cut him off completely? Alice shook her head. They don't understand that when you're in it, when someone's been slowly tightening the noose for months or years, your judgment gets clouded. You start doubting yourself, wondering if you're overreacting. Did she get a restraining order after all this? She's working on it. Her lawyer says with Tyler's arrest record now, it should be approved quickly. Alice looked out at the canyon, squinting against the bright sunlight. She also said she's going to testify against him. Make sure he faces real consequences. That takes guts, especially when you know he's going to be sitting right there in the courtroom staring at you. I thought about that. Harper having to face Tyler again, this time in a formal setting where his obsession would be dissected and displayed for a jury. Will you be there to testify? Probably. They'll want medical documentation of her condition when we found her. Alice paused, then asked, "What about you? Will you go if they call you?" "If they need me, yeah." I finished my water and stood up, ready to hike back, but I hope they don't. I've seen enough of Tyler Marsh to last a lifetime. We hiked back together, talking about other cases, other rescues, the constant stream of humanity that flowed through the canyon, bringing with it every possible variation of joy and tragedy. By the time we reached the rim, I felt lighter somehow, like talking about it had released some of the tension I'd been carrying. Months later, I got a letter from Harper. She didn't have my home address, so she'd sent it to the ranger station, and Martinez had forwarded it to me. The envelope was purple, covered in stamps featuring national parks, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, Uside. Inside was a simple thank you card with a watercolor painting of a canyon sunset on the front. Her handwriting was neat, careful. "Dear Ranger Cole, I wanted to write and let you know that Tyler was sentenced to 3 years in prison plus 5 years probation. The judge called his behavior a textbook case of obsessive stalking that escalated to violence." Those words, having someone in authority finally name what he did for what it was, that meant everything. "I also wanted to thank you for not treating me like I was stupid or weak, for not asking why I didn't do X or Y differently. You just helped me, and that was enough. I'm in therapy now, working through a lot of things. My therapist says I exhibited remarkable survival instincts that day. That my decision to leave the backpack and create false evidence probably saved my life by buying me time. I don't know if that's true, but it helps to hear it. I doubt I'll ever go back to the Grand Canyon. Too many bad memories, but I'm grateful it exists. Grateful that places like that still have people like you watching over them. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for running toward danger when most people would have run away. With gratitude, Harper Quinn." I read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and put it in my desk drawer with the other reminders of why this job matters. The commendations and thank you notes, the photos with rescued hikers, the small tokens of appreciation from people who'd found themselves in trouble and lived to tell about it. That evening I went back to the rim and watched the sunset, same as I'd done hundreds of times before. The canyon was doing its thing, being ancient, being eternal, being utterly indifferent to the human stories that played out on its edges. A family posed for photos nearby, their laughter carrying on the wind. A solo hiker stood at the rail, tears streaming down her face for reasons I'd never know. A young couple held hands and pointed at the layered walls, planning tomorrow's adventure. Normal people, normal moments, all of them temporary visitors to a place that would outlast humanity by billions of years. But for just a moment, on one October day, the canyon had been the stage for Harper Quinn's escape, for her desperate gambit to reclaim her life from someone who thought love meant ownership. And on that same day, the canyon had been my workplace, my responsibility, my chance to make a difference in one person's life. The sunset painted everything in shades of fire, red, orange, gold, purple, colors that seemed impossible and yet were undeniably real. I stayed until full dark, until the stars emerged and the canyon became a black void beneath a glowing sky. Then I went home ready to do it all again tomorrow, because that's what this job is. Showing up every day for the people who need help, who get lost, who make mistakes, who run from monsters, both human and natural. Showing up even when you're tired, even when the job is thankless, even when the canyon seems too big and the problems too complex. You show up because someone has to, because somewhere in that vast emptiness, someone is counting on you to find them, to help them, to see them as more than just another case file or another statistic. You show up because every person matters. Every life is worth saving, and sometimes the difference between tragedy and survival is just one ranger who refused to give up. I thought about Harper, safe in Portland, rebuilding her life. I thought about Tyler locked away where he couldn't hurt anyone. I thought about all the other Harpers and Tylers out there, their stories still unfolding, their endings still uncertain. And I thought about tomorrow's shift, about the hikers I'd meet and the emergencies I'd face, and the thousand small decisions that might save a life or change a story's ending. The canyon would still be there, ancient and patient, waiting for the next chapter in its endless book of human drama. And I'd be there too, doing what I've always done. Watching, searching, protecting. That's the job. That's the promise, and that's enough. There's something about the canyon at night that most people never experience. They see it during the day, all that rust-cold grandeur stretching to the horizon. The tour buses and selfie sticks and families arguing about whether they have time for one more viewpoint before lunch. But at night, when the last visitors have retreated to their hotels and the gift shops have gone dark, the canyon becomes something else entirely. It becomes what it's always been underneath the tourist veneer, ancient, vast, and utterly indifferent to human presence. My name is Elise Montgomery, and I've been working night patrol at Grand Canyon National Park for 3 years now. Most rangers prefer day shifts. Better hours, more predictable incidents, actual sunlight. But I've always been drawn to the quiet hours, those stretches between midnight and dawn, when the park belongs to the creatures that actually live here. Elk moving through the ponderosa pines like grey ghosts, coyotes calling to each other across the rim, mountain lions padding along the trails, their eyes reflecting green in my flashlight beam before they vanish into darkness, and sometimes humans doing things they shouldn't be doing. It was a Tuesday in late September, the kind of night where autumn was just starting to assert itself against summer's lingering heat. The temperature at the rim had dropped to the low 40s, and I could see my breath when I exhaled. I'd been on shift since 1000 p.m., mostly doing routine checks of the parking areas and trailheads, making sure no one had gotten the brilliant idea to start a night hike without proper equipment or permission. Around 1:15 a.m., my radio crackled to life. "Montgomery, you copy?" I recognized the voice. Sarah Kim, working dispatch out of the communication center. "Copy, Kim, what's up? Got a report of an illegal campfire. Caller says they can see flames from their room at the Bright Angel Lodge, somewhere in the Forest Service area, east of the village. Can you check it out?" I was already turning my truck around, heading back toward the developed area. On my way. Did the caller give any specifics on location? Negative. Just said it looked like it was maybe a quarter mile out in the trees. You know how distance gets weird at night, though. She wasn't wrong. In darkness, with nothing but pinpoints of light to judge by, a campfire 200 YD away could look identical to one a mile distant. Depth perception becomes meaningless when you can't see the layers of space between you and your target. "I'll find it," I said. "Probably just some kids who don't know the regulations or don't care," Kim added. "Be careful out there." I pulled into the Bright Angel Lodge parking lot and killed my engine, stepping out into the crisp night air. The lodge itself was dark except for a few security lights, its massive log structure looming against the star-filled sky. During the day, this place was chaos. Hundreds of people flowing in and out, the restaurant packed, the gift shop doing brisk business. Now it was silent except for the wind moving through the pines. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, scanning the tree line to the east. And there, maybe 300 yards out, barely visible through the forest, I caught a flicker of orange light, too steady and contained to be a forest fire, too isolated to be anything official. Someone had definitely set up an illegal camp. I grabbed my pack from the truck. First aid kit, extra batteries, water, emergency blanket, all the standard gear. I also checked my radio and my flashlight, making sure both were fully charged. Cell phones were useless out here. The canyon's depth and the area's remoteness meant signal was spotty at best, non-existent at worst. If something went wrong, that radio was my only lifeline. The approach was tricky. There wasn't a clear trail to where I'd seen the fire, which meant bushwhacking through scrub oak and juniper, trying not to trip over exposed roots or step into one of the countless small ravines that scored the landscape. I kept my flashlight off, not wanting to announce my presence until I had a better sense of what I was dealing with. Could be harmless campers who didn't know better. Could be something more problematic. You develop instincts in this job, a sixth sense for when a situation might turn dangerous. And as I moved through the darkness, that sense was pinging softly in the back of my mind. Something felt off, though I couldn't articulate what. The fire came into clearer view as I closed the distance, a proper campfire ring made of stones, flames burning steady and controlled. Someone who knew what they were doing, at least in terms of fire management. That made the illegal camping aspect even more frustrating. If they knew enough to build a proper fire ring, they knew enough to know you weren't supposed to be camping here. I was maybe 50 yards out when I stopped and called out, "Park Service, this is Ranger Montgomery. You're in a no camping zone, and you need to extinguish that fire immediately." My voice echoed slightly off the trees, then was swallowed by the immensity of the canyon beyond. No response, no movement that I could see. The fire kept burning steady and bright in the darkness. I waited a full minute, then called out again. "This is your final warning. Extinguish the fire and present yourselves, or you'll be cited for multiple violations." Still nothing. That sixth sense got louder. I pulled my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. I swept it across the campsite as I approached, looking for tents, sleeping bags, people. But the circle of light revealed only the fire, the stone ring around it, and nothing. No one. The campsite was completely empty. I moved closer, my hand instinctively dropping to my radio. The fire was well established, probably burning for at least an hour based on the bed of coals underneath the flames. A few partially burned logs lay in the center, their ends glowing orange around the fire ring. The ground was scuffed and disturbed, like several people had been sitting here recently. But there was no camping equipment, no tent, no sleeping bags, no backpacks, no food containers or water bottles. Just the fire burning alone in the forest like some kind of beacon. "Hello," I called out louder this time. "Is anyone here?"
Are you injured?
The wind gusted, making the flames dance and sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. In the distance, I could hear the faint sound of traffic on Highway 64, the occasional vehicle passing in the night. But here, in this small clearing, there was only silence and firelight. I circled the campsite slowly, my flashlight beam probing the surrounding trees, looking for any sign of where the fire starters had gone, why they'd abandoned a burning fire. That alone was a serious violation. Leaving a fire unattended was not only illegal, but incredibly dangerous. In the dry conditions that characterized most of the year here, an uncontrolled flame could trigger a wildfire that would consume thousands of acres. And that's when I saw the boot. It was lying on its side about 15 FT from the fire ring, just barely visible in a patch of scrub brush. A hiking boot, men's size 10 or 11 based on the look of it, brown leather with red laces. I approached it carefully, crouching down to examine it without touching it. The boot was positioned strangely, not like someone had taken it off and set it down, but like it had fallen or been pulled off. The laces were still tied, pulled tight. I could see scuff marks on the sole, dirt caked in the treads, and there on the rim of the boot where leather met rubber was a dark stain that looked disturbingly like blood. My hand went to my radio. "Kim Montgomery, I'm at the fire site. We've got a situation here. Copy. What kind of situation?" "Abandoned campfire still burning, and I found a boot. A single boot, appears to be fresh blood on it. No sign of the camper or campers. I need backup and possibly search and rescue on standby." There was a pause. Then Kim's voice came back. "All business now, copy that. I'm notifying on-duty Supervisor Ines. Can you describe the area more specifically?" I looked around, trying to orient myself in the darkness. "I'm approximately 300 wide east of Bright Angel Lodge, in the Forest Service buffer zone." "The fire is..." I stopped. The fire was getting lower. As I watched, the flames shrank, the logs settling into the coals with soft pops and hisses. In another 5 or 10 minutes, it would be nothing but embers. "Montgomery, you there?" "Yeah, sorry, the fire's dying down. I'm going to need to preserve this scene, but I also can't let it go completely out. I might need the light." I was already thinking through the implications. If this was a crime scene, and that bloodstained boot suggested it might be, I needed to avoid contaminating evidence, but I also needed to be able to see what I was dealing with. Understood. "Ranger Phillips is en route. ETA 15 minutes. Sit tight and keep the scene secure. 15 minutes in the darkness, surrounded by forest with a mysterious abandoned fire and a blood-stained boot." 15 minutes felt like an eternity. I moved back from the boot, pulling out my phone to take photos, even though I knew they'd be grainy and poorly lit. Documentation was crucial. I photographed the fire ring from multiple angles, the disturbed ground around it, the boot from several perspectives. The flash was bright in the darkness, leaving purple after images in my vision. As I worked, I kept listening, straining to hear anything that might indicate where the boot's owner had gone. A cry for help, movement in the brush, anything. But the forest was eerily quiet. Even the wind had died down, leaving only the crackling of the dying fire and the sound of my own breathing. I walked a slow circle around the campsite, my flashlight beam sweeping across the ground, looking for tracks. The soil here was rocky and hard, not ideal for leaving clear footprints, but I found a few scuff marks that might have been boot prints leading away from the fire. They headed north toward the rim, but after about 20 yards, they disappeared where the ground became solid rock. North toward the rim, toward the edge, where the earth dropped away into a mile of empty air. My stomach tightened. I'd been part of enough body recoveries to know that people went over the rim more often than tourists wanted to believe. Sometimes it was accidents, someone getting too close to the edge for a photo, the rock crumbling under their feet. Sometimes it was intentional, and sometimes it was something in between, a moment of poor judgment or panic that ended in a fatal fall. I radioed back to Kim. I've got possible tracks heading toward the rim. I'm going to follow them, but carefully. If you don't hear from me in 10 minutes, send Philip straight to my last known position. Copy that. Be careful, Elise. The use of my first name wasn't standard radio protocol, but I appreciated it. Kim and I had worked together long enough to move past strictly professional relationships. She knew what it was like out here at night, how the darkness could swallow you whole if you weren't careful. I followed the scuff marks, moving slowly, checking each step before committing my weight. The trees started to thin out as I moved north, the ground sloping slightly upward toward the rim. Through gaps in the canopy, I could see stars, thousands of them. The Milky Way a bright slash across the sky, beautiful and cold and infinite. The ground changed from forest floor to bare rock, and the tracks disappeared completely. I was maybe a H100 red yard from the rim now, close enough that I could feel the emptiness beyond that subtle shift in air pressure that told you a vast space was nearby, even if you couldn't see it. I stopped at the edge of the tree line, unwilling to go further without backup. From here, I could see the rim itself, a ragged line of darkness against the slightly lighter darkness of the sky. No movement, no sounds except the wind picking up again. That lonely sound it makes when it sweeps across open rock, with nothing to block it. "Hello," I shouted. My voice is swallowed almost immediately by the emptiness. If you can hear me, call out. I'm here to help. Nothing. Just the wind and the vast silence of the canyon. I was about to turn back when my flashlight beam caught something on a rock near the rim. I moved closer, carefully, always aware of where the edge was even though I couldn't see it clearly. The object was a cell phone. Its screen cracked, but still lit up with a dim glow. I crouched next to it, using my own phone to photograph it before carefully picking it up with a gloved hand. The lock screen showed missed calls and text messages, but I couldn't access them without the passcode. What I could see was the emergency contact information. In case of emergency, contact Emma Leary. There was a phone number with a Portland area code. I bagged the phone as evidence and radioed it in. "Kim, I found a cell phone near the rim. Lock screen shows an emergency contact. Emma Leary, Portland area code. Can you run that name? See if we have anyone registered as camping or visiting under that name. Stand by." I stayed crouched near where I'd found the phone, my light sweeping across the rock. There, more scuff marks. These ones showing clear signs of distress. Long scrapes where someone's boots had dragged across the stone, trying to gain purchase. And at the very edge where the rock gave way to nothing, a small smear of something dark that I very much suspected was blood. My chest felt tight. Someone had gone over this edge tonight recently, and based on the evidence, they hadn't gone willingly. "Montgomery, I've got a hit." Kim's voice crackled. "Owen Leary, registered for a backcountry camping permit starting tomorrow morning. He was supposed to check in at the backcountry office at 8 SAW a.m. Listed his emergency contact as Emma Leary, wife, Portland address. He jumped the gun on his permit. Decided to camp a night early. Looks that way. Want me to contact the wife?" I thought about that about Emma Leary in Portland. Probably asleep, having no idea that her husband's phone was sitting cracked and abandoned on a rock at the Grand Canyon's rim, that his boot was lying bloodstained near an illegal campfire, that he might be dead at the bottom of a mile-deep chasm. "Not yet," I said. "Let's confirm what we're dealing with first. But get SAW ready for a recovery operation and see if we have any way to get a light down into the canyon from here. Check the ledges below this position." "Copy that." I heard footsteps behind me and spun, my hand dropping to my pepper spray. But it was just Ranger Tom Phillips emerging from the tree line with his own flashlight. Tom was in his 50s, built like a bear with a salt and pepper beard, and eyes that had seen pretty much everything the canyon could throw at a person. Kim said, "You found something," he said, his voice low and calm. I quickly briefed him on everything. The fire, the boot, the foam, the scuff marks near the rim. Tom listened without interrupting, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "You think he jumped?" Tom asked when I finished. "I think something happened that made him run or fight. Those marks by the firing, they weren't from someone calmly packing up camp. And the boot? You don't lose a boot like that unless it's pulled off forcibly. So what? Someone attacked him out here in the middle of nowhere." I shook my head. "I don't know, but I don't like it. Something went wrong here tonight. Something bad." Tom nodded slowly. "Let's secure the scene and wait for S. Once we have daylight, we can rappel down, check the accessible ledges. If Owen Leary went over, there's a chance he survived the initial fall, could be injured and waiting for help." We both knew the chances of that were slim. Falls from the rim were almost always fatal. The impact too great for the human body to survive, but almost always wasn't always. And as long as there was any chance Owen Leary was alive down there, we had to search. We walked back to the campfire now, just glowing coals. And Tom added a few small logs to keep it burning for light. Then we established a perimeter using reflective tape, marking off the fire ring, the boot, and the path leading to the rim. This was officially a potential crime scene now, which meant law enforcement would need to process it properly. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. The scenario didn't quite make sense. If Owen had been attacked, where was the attacker? If he'd run in panic, what had he been running from? And why set up an illegal campfire in the first place when he had a legitimate permit starting the next day? "Tom," I said slowly, "you ever worked a case where the scene just felt staged?" He looked at me over the fire. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if this isn't what it looks like? What if someone wanted us to think Owen went over the rim, but he actually didn't? To what end?" That was the question I couldn't answer. But the feeling persisted, that sense that we were being led to a specific conclusion, shown specific pieces of evidence, while other pieces remained hidden in the darkness. The radio crackled. "Montgomery Phillips' S team is mobilizing. They'll be on site by 0400. Park law enforcement is also rolling. ETA 20 minutes. Tom keyed his radio. Copy that. Scene is secured and we're standing by." We settled in to wait, both of us scanning the darkness, listening for anything unusual. The canyon stretched out beyond the rim, invisible but present, its weight and depth and silence pressing in from all sides, and somewhere in that vast darkness, Owen Leary was either dying, dead, or hiding. We just had to figure out which. Park law enforcement arrived in the form of Officer Marcus Rivera, a former Marine who'd traded his dress blues for a Ranger uniform 5 years ago. He approached the scene with the methodical precision of someone who'd processed more crime scenes than he cared to remember, his camera flashing as he documented every detail. The sudden bursts of light in the darkness were disorienting, turning the forest into a strobe-lit nightmare. "Walk me through it," Rivera said, his voice level and professional. I took him through the timeline, the call from dispatch, my approach to the fire, finding the boot, following the tracks to the rim. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a small waterproof notebook he pulled from his vest. "And you didn't see anyone? Hear anything unusual?" he asked when I finished. "Nothing. It was like they just vanished." Rivera moved to examine the boot, crouching down with his flashlight. Blood still tacky. "This happened within the last few hours." He looked up at me. "You said Owen Leary had a backcountry permit starting tomorrow. Any chance he came out early with someone else? Maybe there was an argument." Things got physical. "His permit was for solo camping," Tom interjected. "And we haven't found any evidence of a second person." "Except someone had to light that fire," Rivera pointed out. "Unless you think Owen built it, then somehow lost his boot and went over the rim all by himself." It was a fair point, but it raised more questions than it answered. I walked back to the fire ring, studying it with fresh eyes. The stones were arranged with care, the kind of fire ring someone builds when they know what they're doing. But there was something about the wood selection that nagged at me. "Rhea, come look at this," I called. He joined me and I pointed at the partially burned logs. "See how these are arranged? They're all roughly the same size, same type of wood. Someone gathered these specifically for this fire. It's not random branches someone picked up while walking. So if Owen was planning to camp starting tomorrow, why would he spend time tonight gathering wood for an illegal campfire? He'd be saving his energy for the actual trip." Tom walked over, his expression thoughtful. Maybe he wanted to test his gear, make sure his fire-starting equipment worked before he headed into the backcountry at 1 in the morning, in a location where campfires are explicitly prohibited. I shook my head. It doesn't track. Rivera's radio squawked. Rivera, this is dispatch. S-team is 10 minutes out. Also, I've got Emma Leary on the line. She's been trying to reach her husband, and his phone is going straight to voicemail. She's concerned. We all exchanged glances. Rivera keyed his radio. Tell her we're investigating a situation, and we'll contact her shortly. Don't give specifics yet. Copy that. The wait for the SEER team felt interminable. We maintained our positions around the scene, our flashlights creating overlapping pools of light in the darkness. Every sound seemed amplified. The wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, the crackle of the fire. I found myself thinking about Emma Leary in Portland, probably pacing her living room now. That spouse's intuition, telling her something was wrong even if she couldn't articulate what. When the SAR team finally arrived, they came in force. 6 members with full technical gear, including rope systems, harnesses, helmets with mounted lights, and a portable winch. Their leader was a woman named Sandra Ortiz, a veteran climber who'd been doing canyon rescues for over a decade. What are we looking at? Sandra asked, her voice crisp and efficient. I briefed her on the situation while her team prepped their equipment. She listened carefully, her eyes constantly moving between the fire site, the boot, and the rim. We'll set up a rappel system at the rim. Get someone down to check the accessible ledges, she said. But I have to be honest, if he went over at night in the dark, the chances of survival are minimal. The first ledge is about 100 FT down, and it's not exactly a soft landing. I know, I said, but we have to check. Sandra nodded. We'll be ready to go at first light. Trying to rappel down there in the dark is too dangerous, even with our lights. If Owen survived the fall, a few more hours won't make a difference. If he didn't, she didn't need to finish the sentence. We had 3 hours until sunrise, 3 hours to wait, to wonder, to build theories that might dissolve like morning mist when we finally saw what lay on those ledges. Rivera set up a perimeter and started a more detailed search of the area around the fire ring. I joined him, both of us moving in widening circles, looking for anything we might have missed. Tom coordinated with dispatch, making sure all the necessary people were being notified. Park superintendent, district ranger, public affairs office. When something like this happened, the bureaucratic wheels started turning immediately. I was about 40 FT from the fire when my flashlight caught something metallic glinting in the brush. I called Rivera over, and together we carefully approached. It was a small camping stove, the kind backpackers use to boil water for freeze-dried meals. It was lying on its side, partially hidden under a manzanita bush. That's odd, Rivera said, photographing it from multiple angles. Why would someone leave their stove behind? I thought about that. Camping stoves weren't cheap. Even a basic one ran $60 or $70, and the good ones could cost twice that. No experienced camper would abandon one unless they had no choice, unless they were running from something. Rivera carefully bagged the stove as evidence. I'm going to request a K9 unit at first light. If Owen ran off in a panic, a tracking dog might be able to follow his scent. You think he's still alive? Rivera's expression was carefully neutral. I think we need to consider all possibilities. The blood on that boot wasn't a fatal amount. Maybe he injured himself and wandered off disoriented. Maybe he's holed up somewhere waiting for help. It was possible, but my gut told me otherwise. Everything about this scene felt deliberate, choreographed. The carefully built fire, the strategically placed boot, the stove just far enough away to be found with effort. It felt like breadcrumbs, like someone was guiding us through a story. But whose story? And what were they trying to make us believe? The night dragged on. We took turns warming ourselves by the fire, drinking coffee from thermoses, trying to stay alert despite the fatigue that comes with the hours between 3 and 5 a.m. At one point, Tom dozed off sitting against a tree, his snoring a strangely comforting sound in the tense atmosphere. Around 4:30, the first hints of dawn started to light in the eastern sky. Not sunrise yet, but that subtle shift from black to deep blue that promises the sun will eventually return. The S-team started their final equipment checks, testing ropes and carabiners, double-checking their harness systems. Sandra approached me as the sky continued to brighten. You want to be on the descent team? You've got the technical certification. and you know the situation better than anyone. I considered it. Part of me wanted to be the one to find Owen, whether he was alive or dead. But another part of me needed to stay up here, needed to keep looking at the scene from above, trying to make sense of the puzzle. I'll stay topside, I said, but keep your radio open. I want to hear everything you find. Copy that. By 5:15, there was enough light to begin the descent. Sandra and another SR member, a guy named Keith, geared up and approached the rim. They'd identified a section where the rock face was slightly less vertical, offering a few potential ledges where a falling body might come to rest. The main drop was about 120 FT to the first substantial ledge, then another series of drops beyond that, each one smaller but still potentially fatal. We watched as Sandra backed over the edge, her headlamp creating a bobbing point of light in the shadowy canyon. The rope fed through the belay system with a steady hiss, and Keith followed a minute later on a parallel line. Their voices crackled over the radio, providing a running commentary as they descended, passing 20 feet if nothing visible on the face. 30 feet, there's some scree looks recent. Could be from a rockfall. I found myself holding my breath, my hands clenched tight despite my attempts to stay calm. This was the moment of truth, when theory would collide with reality. 50 FT. I'm seeing what might be fabric snagged on an outcrop. Stand by. The radio went silent for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. Negative. It's just an old tarp. Looks like it's been here for months. Continuing descent, they kept going, their lights getting smaller as they dropped deeper into the canyon. At 80 FT, Sandra called up that she could see the main ledge now, a shelf of rock about 10 FT wide that jutted out from the cliff face. It was the most likely place for a body to have come to rest, approaching the ledge. I've got eyes on it now. Another silence. This one stretched longer, and I could hear the tension in Sandra's breathing over the radio. Montgomery Rivera. We've got blood on the ledge, substantial amount, but no body. I felt my stomach drop. Can you see where the blood trail leads? It looks like it goes to the edge of this ledge and stops. There's more cliff below, drops another couple hundred feet. If Owen went over this ledge, he'd have continued falling. Can you rappel further down? Rivera asked. Not safely. Not with our current setup. We'd need to establish a new anchor point, and the rock quality down there looks sketchy. I'd recommend bringing in helicopter support. Do an aerial search of the lower sections. Rivera nodded, already pulling out his radio to coordinate with dispatch. I moved to the rim, looking down at the tiny points of light that marked where Sandra and Keith were working. The sun was fully up now, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold, making it almost beautiful enough to forget that someone had probably died here last night. Montgomery, there's something else. Sandra's voice crackled. The blood pattern up here, it's not consistent with an impact from a fall. It's more like it was poured or smeared deliberately. My suspicions crystallized into certainty. You're saying the blood was placed there. I'm saying it doesn't look like the natural spatter pattern you'd see from a body hitting rock. It's too uniform, too contained. Rivera and I locked eyes. If the blood on the ledge was staged, if the boot and the phone and the scuff marks at the rim were all theatrical props in some elaborate performance, then where the hell was Owen Leary? The S-team ascended back to the rim, and Sandra immediately approached us, pulling off her helmet. Her face was grim but also confused, like she'd seen something that didn't fit her mental model of reality. In 20 years of doing this, I've never seen a scene like that. She said, "The blood is definitely human. I can tell by the color and consistency, but the way it's distributed, the way it pools in certain spots, someone placed it there. This wasn't an accident. Could Owen have placed it himself?" Tom asked. Maybe he was injured and trying to create a trail. To what end? Rivera countered. If you're injured and need help, you don't climb down a cliff face and stage a blood trail. You stay put and call for rescue. His phone was at the top, I pointed out. Maybe he dropped it and couldn't call for help. Then how did he get down to that ledge? Sandra asked. There's no way to climb down there without rope and technical gear. The rock is too smooth, too vertical. Even if he'd tried, we'd see signs of the attempt. Scraped rock, broken fingernails, more blood from abrasions. There's nothing like that. We stood in a circle around the fire ring, now fully extinguished. All of us trying to make sense of the impossible. A man's blood on a ledge that couldn't be reached without climbing equipment. A boot and a phone carefully arranged at the rim. A camping stove hidden in the brush. And no body, no witness, no explanation. We need to contact Emma Leary, Rivera said finally. She deserves to know what we found, even if we don't have all the answers. I volunteered to make the call, partly because I was the one who'd found the initial evidence, partly because I wanted to hear her reaction firsthand. Sometimes you can learn as much from what people don't say as from what they do. Rivera handed me a satellite phone. Regular cells wouldn't work out here. And I dialed the number from Owen's emergency contact information. It rang twice before a woman answered, her voice tight with tension. "Hello, Mrs. Leary. This is Ranger Elise Montgomery with Grand Canyon National Park. Are you Emma Leary, wife of Owen Leary?" Yes, that's me. Is Owen okay? Did you find him? I've been calling and calling. Mrs. Leary, we're currently conducting a search for your husband. His phone and some of his equipment were found near the South Rim earlier this morning. Can you tell me when you last spoke with him? There was a pause and I could hear her breathing quicken. Yesterday afternoon around 3:00 p.m. He was driving to the canyon. Said he'd arrive around 7 or 8. He was planning to stay at a hotel for the night, then start his backpacking trip this morning. What do you mean you found his phone? Where is he? That's what we're trying to determine. Did Owen mention meeting anyone at the canyon? Any plans other than his solo camping trip? No, he was going alone. That was the whole point. He wanted some time to himself to think. He's been stressed with work, and I thought the trip would be good for him. Her voice cracked. Oh God, did he fall? Did he go over the edge? We're investigating all possibilities. Mrs. Leary, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Had Owen been depressed recently? Any talk of self-harm or suicidal ideation? What? No, Owen would never. He's not like that. He's stressed, yes, but he'd never hurt himself, never. She was crying now, the fear and anguish coming through clearly even over the satellite connection. Please, you have to find him, please. I assured her we were doing everything possible. Gave her Rivera's contact information for updates, and ended the call feeling worse than before. Emma Leary's distress had sounded genuine, her confusion and fear impossible to fake. Either she had no idea what her husband had been planning, or Owen himself had been as much a victim of circumstance as anyone. But victim of what? Rivera was organizing a ground search when I returned, coordinating with additional rangers and volunteers from the area. If Owen was still alive and somewhere in the park, we'd find him. But with every passing hour, the likelihood of a positive outcome diminished. Tom pulled me aside as the search teams mobilized. What's your read on this? Honestly, I think Owen Leary is either dead, or he wants us to think he is. Every piece of evidence we've found points toward a fall from the rim, but the details don't add up. The staged blood, the unreachable ledge, the carefully arranged scene, it feels orchestrated. You think he faked his own death? I think someone did. Whether it was Owen or someone else, I don't know. But this wasn't an accident. Tom nodded slowly. So what do? We search, we document, and we trust that eventually the truth will reveal itself. I looked out at the canyon, at the vast expanse of layered stone stretching to the horizon. One way or another, we'll find out what happened last night. The ground search lasted through the entire day. Teams fanning out in a grid pattern, covering many square miles around the fire site. We checked every trail, every overlook, every accessible ravine and drainage. Helicopter support arrived around noon, their thermal imaging cameras scanning the canyon's depths for any heat signature that might indicate a living person. But as the sun moved across the sky and shadows lengthened into afternoon, we found nothing. No sign of Owen Leary, no additional evidence, no answers. By 4:00 p.m., we were back at the original scene, exhausted and frustrated. Rivera had brought in a K9 unit, and the dog, a German shepherd named Ajax, had tracked Owen's scent from the fire ring to the rim, then lost it completely. Just like the boot prints, just like the blood trail, the scent vanished at the edge, as if Owen had simply evaporated into the canyon air. As I was standing near the fire ring, staring at the cold ashes when my radio crackled. It was Kim from dispatch. "Montgomery, I've got something interesting." I pulled Owen Leary's credit card records. We got a warrant based on the missing person case. His last charge was at a gas station in Williams, Arizona yesterday at 6:15 p.m. But here's the thing. There's another charge this morning at 8:40 a.m. at a coffee shop in Flagstaff. I felt electricity run through my body. Flagstaff? That's an hour south of here. Exactly. Either someone stole his credit card or Owen Leary was alive and buying coffee this morning while we were searching for his body. Rivera had overheard the conversation and was already on his own radio coordinating with Flagstaff PD. Get me security footage from that coffee shop and alert local law enforcement. If Owen's in Flagstaff, I want eyes on him now. The pieces were starting to rearrange themselves in my mind, forming a picture that was disturbing in its implications. I pulled out my notebook, reviewing everything we knew. Owen registers for a backcountry permit starting today. He arrives at the park last night, but instead of staying at a hotel like he told his wife, he sets up an illegal campfire. He leaves evidence of violence, the blood, the boot, the phone, then disappears. And this morning, while we're rappelling down cliffs looking for his body, he's calmly ordering coffee 70 meters away. He staged it, I said aloud, all of it. He wanted us to think he was dead. Tom looked skeptical, but why? What's the point of faking your death if you're just going to use your credit card the next day? That was the question that didn't fit. If you're going to fake your death, you do it properly. No electronic trail, no credit cards, nothing that could place you anywhere. Unless he's not trying to disappear permanently, I said slowly. What if this was just meant to buy him time, create confusion, keep people searching in the wrong place while he does something else? Like what? Rivera asked. I thought about Emma Leary's voice on the phone, her genuine sounding distress. What if it wasn't genuine? What if she'd known exactly where her husband was, and her concern was just another performance? We need to dig deeper into the Lees' background, I said. Financial records, employment history, criminal records, if any. There's a reason Owen wanted us to think he died last night, and it's not just stress from the work. Rivera nodded. I'll get on it. In the meantime, Flagstaff PD is sending a unit to that coffee shop, pulling their security footage. We should know within the hour if it was definitely Owen who used that card. The hour passed with agonizing slowness. We maintained the scene, knowing it would likely become evidence in a criminal investigation rather than a search and rescue operation. Sandra and her SAR team packed up their gear, their disappointment palpable. They'd signed up to save lives, not to be pawns in whatever game Owen Leary was playing. When Rivera's phone finally rang, we all crowded around to listen. He put it on speaker. Rivera, this is Detective Sarah Mills with Flagstaff PD. We've got your security footage from the coffee shop. The person who used Owen Lear's credit card this morning was definitely a male, approximately the right height and build. But here's where it gets interesting. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses, clearly trying to avoid being identified. We couldn't get a clear facial shot. Was he alone? I asked. No, there was a woman with him. Blonde, late 20s or early 30s. They ordered together, sat in a corner booth for about 20 minutes, then left in separate vehicles. The man got into a blue Toyota Camry Arizona plates. The woman drove a white Honda Civic. Couldn't make out the plates on our footage. Rivera and I exchanged glances. Can you track those vehicles? Working on it. We've got units watching for both cars, and I've put out a bolo. Be on the lookout for the Camry with Owen Lear's description. But Rivera, I got to tell you, if this guy is running, he's had almost 12 hours head start. He could be in Mexico by now. After the call ended, Rivera immediately contacted Emma Leary again. This time his questions were harder, more direct. Did she own a white Honda Civic? Did she know anyone in Flagstaff? Had Owen mentioned any friends or associates in Arizona? Emma denied everything, her voice rising with each question until she was nearly shouting. I don't understand what you're implying. My husband is missing, possibly dead, and you're asking me about cars and coffee shops. What is wrong with you people? But there was something in her voice now, a brittle edge that hadn't been there in our first conversation. She was scared, but maybe not scared for Owen. Maybe scared of what we might discover. Rhea ended the call and looked at Tom and me. We need to find out what Owen was running from, or what he was running toward. The answer came 2 hours later, in the form of a phone call from an FBI agent named Jennifer Torres. She'd been monitoring the case through law enforcement channels and had information that made everything suddenly terribly clear. Owen Leary is wanted for embezzlement, Torres said without preamble. He worked as an accountant for a tech company in Portland. Over the past 18 months, he siphoned off approximately $2 million into offshore accounts. The company discovered the theft 3 days ago and filed charges. Portland PD got a warrant for his arrest yesterday morning. The timing clicked into place. Owen finds out he's about to be arrested. He tells his wife he needs a solo camping trip to deal with stress. He drives to the Grand Canyon, stages an elaborate death scene, then disappears while we waste resources searching for a body that was never there. The wife knew, I said. Emma knew what he was planning. That's why she was so insistent on calling his phone. Why she sounded so worried. She was playing her part. Torres confirmed my suspicion. We've had Emma Leary under surveillance since this morning. She withdrew $20,000 in cash from 3 different banks yesterday. She's preparing to run. The woman in the coffee shop. Rivera said that was Emma. She met with Owen this morning to give him the cash. Looks that way. We've got units moving to pick her up. Now as for Owen, we're expanding the search. If he's smart, he'll ditch the car and the credit cards and go completely dark. But most people aren't that smart, especially when they're panicking. The case broke wide open over the next 24 hours. Emma Leary was arrested at Portland International Airport, about to board a flight to Costa Rica. In her luggage, investigators found fake passports for both her and Owen, along with documentation for bank accounts in 3 different countries. She eventually gave up Owen's location, a motel in Tucson where he'd been hiding since leaving Flagstaff. U.S. Marshals took him into custody without incident. In his motel room, they found the laptop he'd used to steal the money, detailed plans for his staged death at the Grand Canyon, and a burner phone with text messages between him and Emma discussing the timing of everything. The blood on the ledge turned out to be pig's blood, purchased from a butcher shop in Williams along with his gas. The boot was an old pair Owen had kept specifically for this purpose. The phone was a decoy, an old model he'd loaded with fake contact information. Every piece of evidence we'd found had been carefully planted, calculated to make us believe he'd fallen to his death, while he slipped away to start a new life with his stolen money. What Owen hadn't counted on was how thoroughly we'd investigate, how quickly we'd spot the inconsistencies in his staged scene. He'd watched too many movies, thought creating a fake death would be as simple as leaving some blood and a boot behind. He hadn't understood that people who do this for a living, Rangers, S-teams, law enforcement, we see through the performance because we've seen the real thing too many times. A week later, I returned to the fire site one last time. The scene had been fully processed and released. The area returned to its natural state. I stood where Owen had built his campfire, where he'd carefully arranged the stones and lit the flames, creating a beacon that would draw us in and start the whole charade. The canyon stretched out beyond the rim, just as vast and ancient as it had always been. It had witnessed Owen Lear's deception with the same indifference it showed to genuine tragedy. The canyon didn't care about embezzlement or fake blood or desperate plans. It just existed, patient and eternal, outlasting all our small human dramas. Tom found me there as the sun was setting, painting the rock walls in shades of fire. Thinking about the case, he asked. Thinking about how we almost believed it, I said. If that credit card charge hadn't come through, if he'd been just a little bit smarter about covering his tracks, we might still be searching for a body that never existed. But he wasn't smarter, and you spotted the inconsistencies almost immediately. I thought about that first moment at the fire ring, that instinct that something was wrong. The canyon teaches you to trust your gut. When something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't. We stood in comfortable silence as the light faded and the stars began to emerge. Somewhere in a federal holding cell, Owen Leary was contemplating the 15-year prison sentence he'd be facing. Somewhere in Portland, Emma Leary was making her own calculations about cooperation and plea deals. And here at the edge of the Grand Canyon, life continued as it always had. Tourists taking photos, rangers patrolling trails, the ancient stone slowly eroding under the relentless pressure of wind and time. My radio crackled. Kim's voice came through familiar and steady. Montgomery, you still on duty? Yeah, I'm here. Got a report of someone stuck on the Bright Angel Trail about 2 miles down. Twisted ankle. Can you respond? I looked at Tom, who nodded. This was the job. The real job, helping people who actually needed it. Not chasing ghosts or unraveling elaborate deceptions, but responding to genuine emergencies with professionalism and care. Copy that, Kim. I'm on my way. As I hiked toward my truck, I took one last look at the fire site. In the darkness, you couldn't see the disturbed ground or the spot where the boot had lain. It looked like any other piece of forest at the canyon's edge. Peaceful, unremarkable, innocent. But I would always know what had happened here. Would always remember the night I'd found an abandoned fire and a blood-stained boot. The night Owen Leary tried to disappear into the canyon's depths. Would always remember how close his deception had come to working, and how the small details, the too perfect firing, the staged blood, the impossible logistics, had unraveled his carefully constructed lie. That's what this job teaches you. Night after night, call after call. Pay attention to the details. Trust your instincts. And remember that the canyon, for all its beauty and majesty, is ultimately just a stage where human stories unfold. Some of those stories are tragic, some are heroic, and some, like Owen Leary's, are simply pathetic attempts to escape consequences that were always going to catch up eventually. The night swallowed me as I drove toward the Bright Angel Trail, toward someone who actually needed help, toward the next chapter in the endless story of people in the canyon, and the thin line rangers walked between them. Behind me, the fire site receded into darkness. Another memory filed away in the vast archive of things I'd seen during my years on night patrol. And tomorrow night I'd do it all again. Driving the dark roads, checking the empty trailheads, responding to calls in the small hours when the canyon belongs to the shadows and the silence, because that's what rangers do. We show up, we investigate, we search for truth in the darkness. Sometimes we find bodies, sometimes we find mysteries, and sometimes we find nothing but lies carefully arranged to look like tragedy. But we always keep looking because that's the job. That's the promise we make to everyone who enters this canyon. Whether they're here for the right reasons or the wrong ones, we'll be watching. We'll be searching. And if you're lost, really lost, not just pretending, we'll find you one way or another. We always do. The morning mist at the Grand Canyon has a peculiar quality that never quite leaves you once you've experienced it. It doesn't just obscure your vision. It distorts reality itself, turning familiar landmarks into alien shapes, making distances impossible to judge. Sound behaves strangely in the fog too, bouncing off invisible walls of moisture-laden air, coming from directions that make no sense. I've been a ranger at the South Rim for 8 years now, and I still find myself occasionally disoriented when the mist rolls in thick, like it did that October morning. My name is Travis Darnell, and I was 3 hours into my shift when the call came through. It was barely past 700 a.m., the sun just starting to burn through the fog that had settled into the canyon overnight. I'd been doing routine checks along the rim trail, making sure the early risers weren't getting too close to the edge, when my radio crackled to life. "Darnell, this is dispatch. We've got a tour guide at Mather Point requesting immediate assistance," says her group went missing on their morning hike. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that comes with any missing person report. "Copy that. How many in the group?" She's saying 6 tourists. They were doing a sunrise photography tour, apparently separated in the fog about 45 minutes ago. Go's name is Nadia Flores. Works for Canyon Vista Tours. I knew the company. They ran legitimate operations, hired experienced guides who knew the terrain. If Nadia Flores was calling for help, it meant she'd already exhausted the obvious solutions. On my way, ETA 5 minutes. The drive to Mather Point took me through patches of fog so thick I had to slow to a crawl, my headlights reflecting back at me like I was driving through milk. When I finally pulled into the parking area, I could barely see 20 FT in any direction. A small figure emerged from the mist as I stepped out of my truck. A woman in her 30s wearing the distinctive burgundy jacket that marked her as a Canyon Vista guide, Ranger Darnell. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the tension underneath. "I'm Nadia Flores. Thank you for coming so quickly. Tell me what happened. Start from the beginning." She took a breath, organizing her thoughts. I had 6 clients booked for a sunrise photography tour. We started at 5:30 a.m. before the fog rolled in. The plan was to hike along the rim trail to 3 different viewpoints, catch the sunrise from each angle. Everything was fine until we reached the second spot near Powell Point. That's when the fog came in fast. I mean really fast. Like someone dropped a curtain. I nodded. I'd seen it happen before. Temperature differentials between the rim and the canyon floor could create fog banks that materialized in minutes, turning clear morning into zero visibility soup. I told everyone to stay close, hold on to the person next to them. But when I did a head count, she paused, her professional composure cracking slightly. 4 people. I only had 4 people. 2 were missing. You're sure they were with you before the fog? Positive. I do constant head-AC counts every 5 minutes, every time we stop. Before the fog hit, I had all 6. After it rolled in, only 4. What did you do then? I secured the 4 I had, told them not to move. Then I backtracked along the trail, calling out names using my flashlight. Nothing. It was like they'd vanished. She pulled out a small notebook. The missing tourists are Michael and Patricia Sutton, married couple from Ohio, both in their 50s. They were at the back of the group taking photos. I was already reaching for my radio. Dispatch Darnell. Initiate search protocol for 2 missing hikers. Rim trail area between Mather and Powell Point. Requesting additional units in S on standby. Copy that, Darnell. Units are rolling. I turned back to Nadia. Where are the other 4 tourists now? I walked them back here to the parking area. They're in my van, safe and warm. I didn't want to risk losing anyone else. Smart thinking. I'm going to need you to show me exactly where you last saw the Sutton. Can you do that? She nodded, but I saw hesitation in her eyes. The fog is still pretty thick out there. I know, but you know the trail, and I need you to help me narrow down the search area. We started walking, Nadia, leading the way with the confidence of someone who'd done this route hundreds of times. Even so, the fog made everything uncertain. Shapes loomed out of the whiteness. A boulder that looked like a person. A twisted juniper that resembled something reaching out. The rim was invisible. Somewhere to our right, the edge of the world hidden behind curtains of mist. How long have you been guiding at the canyon? I asked, partly to gather information, partly to keep her talking and calm. 4 years. I grew up in Flagstaff, spent my summers hiking here. I know these trails like my own backyard. There was a defensive edge to her voice, as if she was anticipating blame. I'm not questioning your competence, I said gently. The fog does strange things. Even experienced people get turned around. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when Nadia stopped abruptly here. This is where I realized they were gone. I was standing right here when I did the head count and came up too short. I looked around, trying to see anything distinctive in the uniform whiteness. The trail was clearly marked here, a paved path with a low stone wall on the rim side. No way the Sutton could have accidentally walked off the edge without climbing over that wall. But there were several spots where unpaved spur trails branched off, leading to less visited viewpoints. Did the Sutton have any hiking experience? Any indication they might wander off trail? Michael mentioned they'd done some hiking in the Smokies back home. They seemed competent, followed instructions well. Patricia had a nice camera, some kind of professional setup. She was really excited about getting shots of the sunrise through the fog, a photographer chasing the perfect shot. That could explain a lot. I'd seen it before. Someone spots an interesting angle, steps off the main trail just for a minute, and suddenly they're lost because the landmark they used to orient themselves has disappeared into the mist. I pulled out my flashlight, even though it was full daylight. The beam cut through the fog better than ambient light, creating a tunnel of visibility. I'm going to check the spur trails. You stay here. Keep calling their names. Sometimes people respond better to a familiar voice. I started with the nearest branching path, a narrow trail that led about 50 yards to a rock outcropping. The fog was even thicker away from the main trail, wrapping around me like a living thing. Every few steps I'd stop, listen, call out, "Michael, Patricia, this is Ranger Darnell with the Park Service. If you can hear me, call out." My voice sounded flat in the fog, absorbed by the moisture before it could carry far. The acoustics were all wrong, making me feel like I was shouting into a pillow. I reached the outcropping, empty, just rocks and scrub brush and that vertiginous drop into whiteness where the canyon should be. I took a moment to orient myself, checking my compass even though I knew which direction was which. The fog could make you doubt everything, including your own sense of direction. I was heading back to the main trail when I spotted something that didn't belong. A splash of color against the gray-brown rocks, red, bright and artificial. I approached carefully, mindful of my footing, and found a camera bag lying open on the ground. "Nadia," I called back toward the main trail. "I found something." She appeared out of the mist moments later, and her face went pale when she saw the camera bag. "That's Patricia's, I recognize it." She kept adjusting the strap, said it was digging into her shoulder. I crouched down to examine it without touching anything yet. The bag was high-end, probably cost more than my monthly paycheck. It lay on its side, the flap open, and inside I could see a camera body with a telephoto lens still attached. No photographer would abandon expensive equipment like this unless something had forced them to. "Stay back," I told Nadia. pulling out my phone to photograph the scene. This might be evidence. Evidence of what? Her voice had gone thin. I didn't answer immediately. I was looking at the ground around the camera bag, trying to read the story written in disturbed dirt and displaced pebbles. Scuff marks indicated someone had been here recently, but the fog-dampened ground didn't hold footprints well. What I did notice was a pattern of disturbance leading away from the bag, heading not back toward the main trail, but further out onto the outcropping, toward the rim, toward the edge. Radio for S, I said quietly. Full deployment. Tell them we need rope teams ready for a possible recovery operation. Nadia's hand shook as she reached for her radio, but she kept her voice professional as she relayed my instructions. While she did that, I carefully picked up the camera bag, looking inside for anything that might tell me what happened here. There was a wallet. Patricia Sutton's ID confirmed. Some lens caps, a granola bar, and a water bottle still half full. But the camera itself was what drew my attention. It was a top-end Canon, the kind serious photographers use, and it was still on, the LCD screen glowing faintly in the fog. I pressed the playback button, and the last photo Patricia had taken appeared on the screen. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. The image was almost entirely white, fog, densely captured in the weak morning light. But in the center, barely visible, was a darker shape, a silhouette, human-sized, standing perhaps 20 ft from where Patricia must have been positioned. The figure was indistinct, blurred by the fog and the limits of the camera's ability to focus through it. But there was something about the shape, about the way it seemed to be facing the camera, that sent an uncomfortable prickle down my spine. I scrolled back through the previous photos. There were several shots of the sunrise, beautiful images of golden light filtering through mist, then a series of shots of the canyon's layered walls as they emerged from the fog, and then this final image, the figure in the mist. Nadia, come look at this. She peered over my shoulder at the LCD screen. What is that? I don't know. Could be another hiker. Could be Michael Sutton. Could be I stopped myself. Could be a trick of light and shadow, a formation of fog and rock that happened to look humanoid for a split second. The rational explanation was always the most likely, especially here, where mist could make you see things that weren't there. But it didn't explain why Patricia's camera bag was abandoned on the ground, or where both Sutton had gone. I was scrolling through more photos when I heard Nadia gasp. "Travis, look." She was pointing into the fog, her arm extended but trembling. I looked where she indicated, but saw only the white wall of mist. What? I saw someone just for a second, a shape moving out there. She pointed more specifically. That direction, maybe 30 ft away. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam through the fog in the direction she'd indicated. Nothing. Just rocks and sparse vegetation in the ever-present mist. "Michael, Patricia, if that's you, identify yourselves." Silence, not even an echo. The fog ate the sound. "Maybe I imagined it," Nadia said, but her voice held doubt. "The fog plays tricks," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Especially when you're stressed, your brain starts filling in gaps, seeing patterns that aren't really there." But even as I said it, I thought about that silhouette in Patricia's photograph. Someone or something had been out here in the fog with her. Close enough to photograph, close enough to startle her into dropping her expensive camera. My radio crackled. "Darnell, this is Martinez. I'm at Mather Point with the SAR team. What's your status?" "I'm at the outcropping south of Powell Point. I found an abandoned camera bag belonging to one of the missing tourists. The situation is unclear. I need teams to start searching all spur trails and viewpoints between here and Mather Point. Copy that. We're mobilizing now. The fog is starting to thin at the rim. Should have better visibility in the next hour." That was good news. But it also meant we'd been searching for over an hour now. If the Sutton had wandered to the rim's edge in the fog, if they'd gotten disoriented and taken a wrong step. I secured Patricia's camera bag and made careful note of its location. Then Nadia and I continued along the outcropping, searching for any other signs of the Sutton. The fog was indeed starting to thin, patches of clear air opening up like windows into the normal world. Through one such gap, I caught a glimpse of the canyon itself, that impossible depth, the layered walls dropping away into shadows that even the morning sun couldn't fully penetrate, and that's when I saw it. Another camera lying on a rock about 40 ft from where we'd found Patricia's bag. This one was different, smaller, a point-and-doot model. I approached it carefully, and when I picked it up, I recognized the brand as something Michael Sutton might have carried as a backup to his wife's professional rig. The camera's screen was cracked but still functional. I turned it on and checked the last photos. They showed Patricia photographing the sunrise, then some shots of the fog itself. Michael had been photographing his wife, photographing the landscape, a common dynamic I'd seen with photography couples, but the last image made me pause. It was taken from a different angle than Patricia's final shot, but it showed something similar, a shape in the fog. Only this time the shape was clearer, closer. It looked like a person, standing with their back to the camera, arms slightly outstretched. The posture was strange, wrong somehow, like someone frozen mid-gesture. And beyond this figure, barely visible in the background, was another shape. And possibly another beyond that. Multiple figures standing in the fog, not moving, just standing there. "What the hell?" I muttered. Nadia looked at the image and her face went white. Are those people? I studied the photo more carefully. The fog created visual artifacts. I knew that swirls of mist could look like faces, like bodies, like anything your brain wanted to see. But these shapes had structure, symmetry. They looked deliberate. Could be other hikers, I said, hearing the uncertainty in my own voice. The fog makes groups of people look strange, separates them visually. But another part of my brain was asking a different question. If these were other hikers, why hadn't they responded to our calls? Why were they just standing there, motionless in the fog? I took more photos of Michael's camera and its location, then secured it as evidence. The S-teams were arriving now. I could hear voices calling out in the distance. See flashlight beams cutting through the thinning mist? Good. We needed more people, more eyes searching this area. But as we waited for the teams to reach our position, I couldn't stop thinking about those figures in the photographs, about the way they stood, so still and silent, about how neither Michael nor Patricia had called out for help despite being equipped with phones and voices, about how people could just vanish into the fog at the Grand Canyon, swallowed by mist and silence, leaving behind only images that raised more questions than they answered. The canyon had seen thousands of disappearances over the decades. Some were eventually solved, bodies recovered, circumstances understood. Others remained mysteries, people who walked into the vastness and simply never came back. I had a sinking feeling that Michael and Patricia Sutton might be joining that second category. The S-team spread out across the outcropping in a coordinated search pattern. Each member separated by arm's length, moving slowly through the thinning fog. I briefed team leader Martinez on what we'd found. The abandoned cameras, the strange photographs, the complete absence of the Sutton despite less than 2 hours having passed since they disappeared. "Show me those photos again," Martinez said, taking Michael's camera from me. She studied the images of the figures in the fog, her expression impossible to read. Could be atmospheric phenomena. Temperature inversions can create optical effects, make fog look like solid objects. "That's what I'm thinking," I said, wanting to believe it. The Suttons see these shapes in the fog, get disoriented trying to figure out what they're looking at, wander off the trail, or they panic, Martinez added. See something they interpret as threatening, run blindly. It happens. Fear makes people do irrational things. It was a reasonable explanation, more reasonable than the alternative my lizard brain kept suggesting. That those figures in the photographs were real. That something had been standing in the fog watching the Sutton. But that was paranoia, the kind of thinking that led to conspiracy theories and campfire stories, not professional search and rescue operations. We'd been searching for another 30 minutes when one of the SER members called out, "I've got clothing fresh. Looks like it was dropped recently." We converged on his position. He was holding a fleece jacket, women's medium, with a Canyon Vista Tours tag sewn into the collar, part of Nadia's standard equipment issue for clients who underdressed for the morning cold. Patricia Sutton's jacket. She wouldn't just drop this, Nadia said, her voice tight. It was cold this morning. Nobody takes off their jacket in this weather, unless they're in distress, unless they're overheating from exertion or panic, unless they're no longer thinking rationally. The jacket was lying about 60 FT from where we'd found Michael's camera, off the main trail, but not quite at the rim's edge. I examined the ground around it, looking for tracks for any indication of which direction Patricia had been heading. The fog-dampened soil held faint impressions. Boot prints heading not toward the parking area, but parallel to the rim, deeper into the maze of rock formations and viewpoints that characterize this section of the South Rim. She was running, I said, pointing at the spacing of the footprints. Long strides, irregular pattern, definitely running. From what? Martinez asked the question we were all thinking. From the figures in the fog, my mind whispered. From something she saw that made her drop her expensive camera and run until she was shedding layers of clothing. But I said, from her own fear, probably. Panic attack, disorientation. The fog can do that to people. We followed the boot prints, the SR team maintaining formation while I took point. The fog was continuing to thin, visibility extending to maybe 100 feet. Now enough to see the rim's edge when we got close to it, that subtle line where solid ground gave way to empty air. I found myself checking the distance compulsively, making sure we weren't drifting too close. The boot prints led us on a winding path through rock formations, past viewpoints I recognized from my daily patrols. We were heading toward a section called the Abyss, a particularly dramatic overlook where the canyon wall dropped away in a sheer face for over 3,000 FT. It was a popular spot for photographers during the day, but in fog with visibility minimal, it was treacherous. Darnell, one of the SEER members, called. "I've got something." He was pointing at a rock face about 40 FT to our right. I approached and saw what had caught his attention. Smears of blood on the stone, fresh enough to still be slightly wet. Not a lot of blood, just handprints like someone had braced themselves against the rock. Patricia or Michael? Martinez asked. No way to know without testing, but whoever it was, they were here recently. So I photographed the blood smears, noting their position and height. The handprints were at shoulder level, pressed hard against the rock like someone pushing away or trying to steady themselves. They were moving fast, lost their balance, used the rock to keep from falling. We were close now. I could feel it. That instinct that comes from years of search and rescue work. The Sutton was somewhere ahead of us, and we were following their trail like breadcrumbs. But unlike the fairy tale, I wasn't sure these breadcrumbs would lead us anywhere we wanted to go. The boot prints ended at a flat expanse of rock about 30 ft from the Abyss overlook. Just stopped like Patricia had vanished mid-stride. I swept my flashlight across the area, looking for any sign of where she'd gone next. But the rock held no tracks, revealed no secrets. "Fan out," Martinez ordered. "Check every crevice, every depression. She has to be here somewhere." The team spread out in a careful search pattern. I moved toward the rim, keeping a safe distance, but using my flashlight to illuminate the edge, looking for any sign that someone had gone over. The fog was thinner here, pulled down into the canyon by air currents, and I could actually see down to the first ledge about 40 FT below, and that's where I found him. Michael Sutton was lying on a narrow ledge, his body twisted at an angle that immediately told me he was seriously injured or dead. I couldn't see much detail from above, but I could see enough to know we needed rope access immediately. "Martinez, I've got one of them." Male subject on a ledge approximately 40 FT down. The S team mobilized instantly, pulling out rope systems and harnesses. Martinez radioed for a helicopter with a hoist capability. We might be able to rappel down to Michael, but extracting an injured person from that ledge would require aerial support. Stood there for so long just standing and not moving. I could see them through the gaps in the rocks like statues made of fog. When did they leave? When the sun came up. When the fog started to thin, they just faded, dissolved back into the mist. She grabbed my arm suddenly, her grip surprisingly strong. But they're not gone. They're in the walls now. I can feel them watching. Rodriguez had been looking around the alcove while Patricia spoke, and now he gestured for me to join him. I moved away from Patricia. Martinez was wrapping her in an emergency blanket and preparing to evacuate, and Rodriguez pointed at the walls. There were handprints here too, dozens, maybe hundreds, covering the rock face at various heights, but these were different from the ones Martinez had photographed in the canyon. These were old, weathered by years or decades of exposure, and they formed patterns, deliberate designs that looked almost like writing in a language I couldn't read. "Indigenous art," Rodriguez said quietly. "Has to be some kind of ceremonial site, maybe." But the handprints looked wrong somehow. The proportions were off, the fingers too long, the palms too narrow. Or maybe that was just my imagination, primed by Patricia's story to see something sinister in what was probably just ancient art created by people who'd lived in this area centuries before the Park Service existed. We got Patricia out of the alcove and back to the main trail. The helicopter had arrived by then, and we had Michael's body secured in a recovery basket. Patricia was loaded onto a stretcher, still murmuring about the figures in the fog, about silence and watching eyes. The helicopter lifted off, carrying them both away, one to the morgue, one to the hospital. Nadia approached me as the helicopter's sound faded into the distance. What really happened out there? I thought about the photographs, the handprints, Patricia's terrified whispers. I thought about all the rational explanations, optical illusions, panic attacks, the human mind's tendency to create patterns and meaning from chaos. And I thought about the canyon itself, this ancient scar in the earth that had witnessed countless human dramas, some of which defied easy explanation. The fog disoriented them, I said finally. They saw shapes that weren't there, panicked and ran. Michael fell to his death. Patricia hid until we found her. That's what happened. But the photos were artifacts, tricks of light and moisture. The human eye is designed to see faces and patterns even when they don't exist, especially in conditions like we had this morning. Nadia nodded slowly, wanting to believe it. I wanted to believe it too, and maybe it was even true. Maybe everything could be explained by rational scientific principles if you just looked hard enough. But that night when I returned to the alcove alone with proper photography equipment, I documented those handprints on the walls, hundreds of them overlapping, creating patterns that almost looked intentional. And when I measured them carefully, I confirmed what I'd suspected. The proportions were wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously, but wrong enough that they couldn't have been made by normal human hands. I filed my report according to protocol. 1 tourist dead from an accidental fall. 1 tourist rescued with minor injuries and psychological trauma. Contributing factors: heavy fog, disorientation, panic, no criminality suspected. Case closed. The photographs from the cameras were logged as evidence and then forgotten, filed away in a digital archive that nobody would ever review unless they were specifically looking for them. The handprints in the alcove were noted as possible indigenous artwork and scheduled for academic study that would probably never happen because there were always higher priorities, always more pressing concerns. And I went back to my regular patrols, my routine checks of trails and overlooks, my interactions with tourists who wanted to know the best spots for photos or whether they could see the Colorado River from the rim. But sometimes on mornings when the fog rolls in thick and white, when visibility drops to nothing and the world becomes a colorless void, I think about Patricia Sutton's words, about the figures she claimed stood in the mist, silent and still and watching, about the way they supposedly followed Michael to his death, then returned to surround the alcove where she hid, standing vigil until the sun burned them away. And I think about all the people who've disappeared at the Grand Canyon over the years, the ones whose bodies were never found, whose fates remained mysteries. I think about whether any of them saw what the Suttons saw, whether they ran from the same shapes in the fog, whether some of them are still out there somewhere, standing silent and still in the places where mist gathers and light plays tricks. The rational part of my mind knows it's all explainable. Fog creates optical illusions. Fear causes panic. Accidents happen in dangerous terrain. People see what they expect to see, what they fear to see, what their primal brains convince them is there even when it's not. But the part of me that's walked the South Rim for 8 years, that's felt the canyon's weight and age and indifference to human understanding, that part isn't quite so sure because the canyon keeps its secrets. It always has. And maybe some of those secrets are better left in the fog, in the silence, in the spaces between what we can explain and what we can only fear. Michael Sutton is buried in Ohio. Patricia lives in a care facility outside Cleveland, still occasionally talking about the shapes in the mist, still insisting they were real, that they're waiting in the fog for the next person who wanders too far from the marked trails. And I'm still here, walking the rim, watching the fog when it comes, listening to the silence between the voices of tourists and the wind, still watching, still wondering, still unable to completely dismiss what I saw in those photographs, in Patricia's eyes, in the ancient handprints that cover the walls of that isolated alcove. The Grand Canyon has claimed thousands of lives over the centuries. Most of those deaths have explanations, causes we can understand and document and prevent, but not all of them. And on the foggy mornings when I'm out on patrol alone, and the world reduces to white silence and invisible drops into endless space, I remember that there are some things the canyon will never give up. never explain, never allow us to fully understand. I remember and I keep walking, and I trust that the fog will eventually lift. It always does, doesn't it?